Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
One Piece, The Agony of Weakness, by SilverWrath. Luffy has to face an agony that he has never felt before. True weakness. Can Nami help him before he does something that they will regret for the rest of their lives? Luffy x Nami. Grateful, touched. Huge shout out to all the warlords of this channel. You know who you are. Want to stand among legends? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios.
The sun had set and the crew had turned in for the night. The entire ship was silent. Nami stood on the deck of the Sunny among her tangerine trees with Luffy's straw hat sitting comfortably on her head. She felt comfortable among the orange fruit. As she ran her hand over one of the fruit, her thoughts drifted back to her conversation with Luffy. She had told him that his devil fruit powers were gone, but she wasn't prepared for his reaction. He lost it. That was the best way Nami could think to describe it. Luffy had collapsed to his knees and cried on the floor. Nami had done her best to comfort him and, after what felt like an eternity, it seemed to have worked. Luffy had been reclusive and silent for the rest of the day though. That made Nami uncomfortable. Nami sighed and walked towards the stairs. As she reached the top of the stairs, she looked over the ship. Most of the crew was asleep. She had volunteered to stay on watch that night. The crew had had a hard day and she wanted them to relax as much as possible. As Nami scanned the ship, she saw a familiar silhouette sitting on the lion figurehead of the ship. Her hands slowly reached up to her head and she gripped the brim of the straw hat. Luffy had put it on her head after he had woken up, but he never taken it back. Honestly, Nami was in no rush to return it. She loved wearing that hat. Her eyes drifted to the young man sitting on the figurehead. "I should go over and talk to him," she said aloud to no one. Luffy finally seemed to be accepting his fate. Like he had told her earlier, he was the captain. He had to be strong no matter what happened. His words did little to console her. Nami knew that Luffy was only trying to protect her, but she wished Luffy would just talk to her about how he was feeling. She looked up towards the sky. Now that I think about, Nami thought. He never even talked about his brother's death. Every traumatic event that he goes through is shoved to the back of his mind. He never deals with them. Nami began descending the stairs. "Well, that stops right now," she said aloud, her voice thick with Nami attitude. "There's no damn reason he needs to deal with everything by himself. Damn it, I'm here for him and he needs to get that through his thick skull." She stopped talking as she stepped onto the grass lawn. She looked back to where Luffy was sitting. From her current position, she was unable to see him. The figurehead was blocking her view. She took a deep breath and walked across the lawn. As she walked, she began to have second thoughts. Maybe it would be best for him to be alone right now? Nami shook her head and quickly tossed those thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to stop now. She crossed the lawn and walked up the stairs leading to the helm of the ship. She stopped next to the helm. She hesitated for a moment to see if he was going to make the first move. After a few moments, it became apparent that he was not. So Nami spoke up. "Hey, Luffy," she called. "You still awake up there?" His response came back quickly. "Yeah, I'm awake," he said. His voice seemed almost cheerful. Nami walked up to the figurehead and stopped next to it. "Can I come up and sit with you?" Nami asked. "Sure," he replied. As soon as he finished speaking, he appeared at the top of the figurehead holding out his hand. Nami smiled and took his hand. "Careful, I don't want you to fall," Luffy said. Even now he was so caring and gentle. He gripped Nami's hand and helped her over the figurehead and down onto the nose in front of the ship. Nami stepped onto the nose expecting Luffy to let go of her hand. Instead, he held her hand as he slid down onto the nose. He stood there next to her silently looking out over the dark waves. Neither one of them said anything for a while. Nami was okay with that. Just having someone near him was probably helping him. Her goal here wasn't to force information out of him. It was to make sure that Luffy knew that he could talk to Nami if he wanted to. She wanted him to know that she was there for him. After a few moments of silence, Luffy finally spoke. "It's not fair, you know." Nami looked at him. She guessed that her plan had worked. Luffy sat down on the lion and stared out over the sea. "I know, babe. Nami said quietly as she sat down next to him. She didn't know what she could say to him. As she tried to think of something else to say, he kept speaking. I have been rubber for as long as I can remember. My gum attacks are how I fight. I don't know any other way. Luffy turned his head and looked at Nami. She could see the tears beginning to form in his eyes. Zoro and Sanji want to teach me how to fight the way they do, but I don't want to kick or use swords. I want my gum back. Nami was completely lost for words at this point. She wanted Luffy to open up to her, but she never honestly expected him to. Luffy sighed and leaned towards Nami, resting his head on her shoulder. Nami finally found something to say to him. So, you're lost? She asked. Luffy didn't respond. Nami leaned her head toward Luffy's and rested it against his. You're trapped and you have no idea how you are going to go on. Luffy chuckled. Nami, he asked quietly. You aren't helping. Nami smacked his leg. I'm working on it, shut up, she said half sternly. Luffy sat there listening. Good, you know Luffy, I was like that once. I was lost and alone. I had no one. I had taken on a burden that no one else could carry and I refused to let anyone get near me. Nami sighed. She was talking about her days under the evil fishman Arlong. She was forced to work for him in exchange for the safety of her home village. She was a slave with no hope of freedom. I was ready to give in to my fate and I had no way to stop it. But then something happened. She lifted her head and looked at Luffy. He did the same. I met you, she said sweetly. She raised her hand to her hat on her head. You picked me up, you fought for me. You forced me to understand that I couldn't handle everything by myself. You made me realize that even I needed help sometimes. I wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for you. Nami slipped her fingers in between his. You made me realize that there is always a way out. And you know what? There's a way out of this too. Nami leaned over and kissed Luffy. You were there for me. Please let me be here for you. We will find some way to help you. We will get your powers back. Nami winked at Luffy. Have a little faith in your crew, Captain. Have a little faith in me. Luffy wiped his eyes and smiled at her. Yeah, you're right. You and Chopper are real smart. You guys will find some way to fix me, he said calmly. Nami smiled and nodded. We will. I promise. Nami smiled. Luffy finally seemed to be calming down. She could see it in his eyes. Now you had to promise me something, she said. She raised her hand back to the hat. She gently pulled it off her head, letting her hair catch the string as she pulled. The string let go and Nami's hair fell back down onto her shoulders. Luffy watched, admiring how beautiful Nami was sitting in the moonlight. Nami took the hat and placed it back onto Luffy's head. Luffy smiled and waited for her to continue. You have to promise me that you will keep your spirits up. Please don't let this take the light out of your eyes. Luffy locked his eyes onto Nami's. Promise me, she said. Luffy nodded and leaned in and kissed her lips. The two stayed locked together for a few seconds before Luffy broke it off. I promise, Luffy said with a smile. Nami smiled back. And from now on, no hiding your feelings from me. I don't want you keeping your emotions bottled up like this anymore. It's not good for you. Luffy tilted his head to the side. I would trust you if something was bothering me. Don't you trust me? She asked playfully, shooting Luffy a pair of puppy dog eyes. Luffy's head snapped back up and he nodded. Of course I do. But I am captain, I just can't. He scratched his head. Alright, but I can't talk like that around the rest of the crew, he stated firmly. Nami giggled. She loved watching Captain. It was adorable. That's fine. I just don't like you lying to me. Luffy nodded and promised her again. The pair sat there in silence for a while, just watching the stars above them. Hey Nami, Luffy asked quietly. Yeah? You are going to stay out here with me, right? He asked innocently. A large smile spread across her face. Of course. I wouldn't dream of leaving you by yourself. She laid her head on his shoulder. I will always be here, Luffy. I promise. Luffy nodded and laid his head on hers. Good, he said. I like it when you are with me, he said, and I trust you with my life, Nami. You and Chopper will find something. Nami lifted her hand and laid it across his mouth. Shush, Nami said sweetly. Stop worrying. Okay. Let's just enjoy this quiet night. Luffy nodded and fell silent. The pair sat there in silence for the rest of the night, listening to the waves and watching the stars. The next morning, Nami decided to talk to Chopper about what they could do about Luffy's problem. After a fun breakfast of watching Frankie trying to measure Luffy for his robotic replacements, and Zoro and Sanji fighting over who was going to stop Frankie, Nami left the dining room. As she left, she could hear Luffy shouting for someone to help him. She ignored him and headed for Chopper's office. Chopper was sitting at his desk surrounded by books. He had skipped breakfast entirely. Nami wondered if he had slept at all last night. She walked over to the desk and leaned over the young reindeer. "Hey Chopper," Nami said. "Can I talk to you about something?" Chopper looked up from his book and focused on Nami. He looked a bit annoyed about the interruption, but he nodded, turning his eyes back to the book. "What's up, Nami? Are you feeling sick?" Chopper asked, only half paying attention. Nami shook her head. "No, it's about Luffy," she said calmly. That got Chopper's attention. He spun his chair around and faced Nami. He crossed his arms seriously. "What about him?" he asked, his tone matching his serious pose. Nami tried not to smile at the adorable sight. "Well, I was wondering if you had any ideas on how to help him. I know you have some kind of plan by now." Chopper averted his eyes as she spoke. "I knew it, I want to help and you don't get to refuse," Nami added threateningly. Chopper shuddered at Nami's threatening tone and sighed. "Look, Nami," Chopper said nervously. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't think—" Nami cut him off mid-sentence. "No, I am helping you. End of story," Nami ordered, glaring into Chopper's eyes. Chopper jumped out of his chair and hid behind his desk, his body sticking out from behind the desk. "You can't," he snapped, trying to make himself as little as possible. Nami slammed her hand down on his desk and Chopper yelped. "Please don't hit me, just hear me out." Nami nodded but kept her fist on the desk in Chopper's view. He swallowed and continued. I do have an idea, but it's more of a hypothesis." Nami nodded. "Yeah, Robin told me. You think that Luffy's body will naturally restore his devil fruit powers given time. She also told me that you have something else up your sleeve and you are letting her help you. You sent her into town this morning to buy you a few things, right?" Nami accused. Chopper shuddered again. "I knew it. You just don't want my help." No, that's not it at all. Chopper ducked his head as Nami brought her fist up. "No, wait. I just think you are too emotional to think clearly, that's all. A process like this requires complete and utter focus. We can't afford to have your emotions endangering the process." Nami blinked a few times listening to Chopper. She paused and released her fist. She stood there silently contemplating his words. She sat down on Chopper's chair and thought about it. "Okay, you were right," she said. "I was too emotional. Now I'm fine. My head is clear and I want to help you in any way I can." Chopper looked down at the floor. Before he could respond, she continued. "Okay, hang on. I'll make you a deal. If I am too emotional, you can kick me out and I won't bother you anymore. Deal?" Chopper nodded and slowly came out behind the desk. "Okay, cool. So why don't you run your hypothesis past me? Start at the beginning." Chopper hesitantly agreed and laid out his entire theory to Nami. Robin walked down the street of the city of Cardioa. Chopper had sent her out to buy several medicinal ingredients and a book that he didn't already have. She looked at her list. She had already obtained 5 of the 10 items on the list and she was looking for a shop that would be able to provide her with the rest. She wandered down the road dodging people as she walked. After a while, she found a store that might be able to provide the items. As she walked towards the door, a young man stepped in front of her and blocked her from entering the store. The man stood in front of her just staring at her. Robin smiled at him. "Is there something I can help you with?" Robin asked sweetly. The man glared at her. "Yeah, you can. Tell me, how did you get onto this island?" His gravelly voice had an accusing tone to it. Trying not to seem suspicious, Robin answered. "Well, I came to the island with a few of my friends," she answered simply. She didn't lie to the man, but she had to be careful what information she revealed. This island was Navy territory and there was a Navy base on the island. In fact, Robin could see the base from the street she was on. This man could be a spy for the Marines. Yeah, he answered. "But how?" he demanded. Something was wrong. This guy was too demanding in his questions. Robin had dealt with the Marines hundreds of times, and she got a Marine feeling from this guy. She became extremely uncomfortable speaking to him. Robin nodded. We were dropped off by our ship. We are travelers, she responded. The man wasn't satisfied. Robin continued. We are simple travelers that are visiting all of the islands in the New World. We are working on a book about all of the various islands and their climates. This island was next on our agenda. That's all. The man crossed his arms. Without another word, he turned and walked away. As she looked over the man, she noticed a marine tattoo on his lower arm, confirming her fears. Robin's blood ran cold. Were the Marines onto them? She quickly walked into the store, bought her supplies and left. On her way back to the Sunny, Robin made sure to take a long path that led around most of the island before sneaking back to the ship. She did everything she could to make sure she wasn't followed. Sanji kicked down the door to the kitchen and scanned the room. He walked into the room and looked around. Damn it, he mumbled as he turned on his heel and walked back out the door. Not here either. He walked out onto the balcony. At the same time, the hatch leading to the lower levels of the ship burst open. Frankie climbed out with a confused look on his face. Sanji called to him. Hey Frankie. Any luck? The cyborg shook his head. Nah. I can't find him anywhere. He jumped out of the hatch and closed it behind him. You don't think Zoro found him first, do you? Sanji shook his head. No way. That mosshead can't even find himself. There's no way he could catch Luffy, with or without his powers. Frankie nodded. Whatever, I know what will bring him out. I'm going to cook some lunch. Wherever he is, he will come running. Frankie laughed. Super idea there, cook. Frankie said as he climbed the stairs. But I'm not just going to let you have him. I know that Luffy wants to become a super cyborg like me. Sanji cut him off by raising his hand. No way. I'm done debating this. The whole point of this manhunt is to let Luffy decide what he wants to do for his new fighting style. I'll cook, you grab him and the useless swordsman can go fall in a ditch. Frankie laughed as Sanji walked back into the kitchen. Alright, you have a point. I'll stay out here to keep watch for him. I'll be able to grab him real easy without his powers. We already screwed this up once. Maybe we shouldn't he was sleeping. We scared the piss out of him. Frankie laughed harder as he remembered the first time Zoro and Sanji attacked Luffy that morning. It had been during breakfast. They wanted him to decide immediately who would be teaching him how to fight. They wanted an answer that morning and they were going to get it. During the resulting struggle, Luffy used his haki to fight all three of them off and ran. He was hiding somewhere on the ship but none of them could find him. Frankie scratched his head. Hey Sanji, do you think we are pushing him too quickly? Do you think he needs a few days to come to terms with what has happened? He asked as he walked into the kitchen and sat down. Sanji sighed. Whether he is ready or not isn't the issue. He's Monkey D. Luffy. He is an infamous pirate captain. He has declared war on the world government, made enemies out of most of the 7 warlords, and personally challenged one of the 4 emperors. He doesn't have the luxury of being traumatized, you know that. It's only a matter of time before the Navy finds us. If he's going to be the king of the pirates, he needs to be adaptable. Frankie nodded. Yeah, I guess so. I just have never seen him this down, you know? Frankie shrugged. Ah well, no use sitting around. I'll go keep an eye out. Frankie headed towards the door and walked out. As he stepped onto the balcony, he saw Nami walking up the stairs. Hey Nami. She turned, stopped ascending and looked over towards Frankie. What's up? Before you go anywhere, I got a question for you. Nami nodded, shifting her shoulders uncomfortably. It seemed that she was going somewhere in a hurry. Before Frankie could continue, Sanji burst out of the kitchen door, knocking Frankie off the balcony with a swift kick. Nami Swan! Sanji shouted as he jumped over to her. He landed on one knee in front of her, holding a glass of wine in his hand. He held it up for her. Here you go, my darling. A fine wine for a perfect lady. Nami took the drink and took a quick sip from it. Oh wow, it's great. Thank you Sanji, Nami exclaimed. Sanji threw himself back towards the door, squealing in delight. He seemed to float back into the kitchen. Nami could hear him giggling and dancing in the kitchen. She could hear him saying something about stealing her away from Luffy and sweeping her off her feet. Nami shook her head. As if that's not gonna happen, she thought. She heard a grumble from the deck below her. She glanced over the railing and saw Frankie walking back towards the stairs. Frankie? You wanted to ask me something? The cyborg nodded, rubbing his neck. Yeah. Bastard. That hurt. Where the hell did he even come from? He glared at the entrance to the kitchen but then shook his head and turned his attention back to Nami. Yeah. You look busy so I won't keep you, but do you know where Luffy is? I haven't seen him since our breakfast brawl and we are looking for him. I figured if anyone would know where he is it would be you. Nami took another sip of her wine and took a moment to enjoy the flavor. After a few seconds she shook her head. Sorry Frankie. I haven't seen him, she answered. Frankie frowned. Last time I saw him you guys were mauling him at the breakfast table. Frankie laughed. Alright. Thanks anyway. He walked past her and walked onto the balcony. So where are you off to in such a hurry? Nami sipped at her wine again and finished off her drink. She looked at the glass with a disappointed look. I'm on my way to the library to work on a few of my charts that have been collecting dust. She looked at Frankie and then back at her glass. Come to think of it, I think I'll take some more of that wine with me. She looked towards the door to the kitchen. Hey Sanji? Nami called. Could I have that bottle? I would like some more while I'm working on my charts. She could hear a series of loud thuds from the kitchen and Sanji leapt out of the door with the bottle in hand. He jumped towards Nami, kicking Frankie out of the way again, sending him flying over the railing back down towards the grass lawn. He held out the bottle. Here you go my darling, he said as Nami quickly grabbed the bottle out of Sanji's hand before he finished talking. Suddenly a large metal hand grabbed Sanji's leg and pulled him off of his feet and over the railing. Not this time you little turd, Frankie shouted as he pulled on the chain that connected his hand to his arm. If I'm going, Frankie slammed into the deck, still pulling Sanji down. You're coming with me, he shouted as he slammed Sanji into the grass. Sanji jumped up and started shouting at Frankie. Nami rolled her eyes and continued walking up the stairs. She reached the top of the stairs and walked across the deck past her tangerine trees. As she walked by, she gently ran her fingers across them. Without breaking stride, she gently grabbed one and pulled it off of the stem. She continued to the library door and opened it. She walked in and closed the door. She glanced around the room and smiled. On her desk sat an innocent straw hat. She walked over to the couch that encircled the room and sat down. She took a bite of the tangerine. Luffy, she said after she swallowed her bite. It's okay, it's only me. You can come out. She looked over at her desk and saw Luffy pop his head out from under it. He looked around the room and sighed before crawling out. Nami smiled as she poured herself another glass of wine and watched him climbing out from under her desk. He reminded her of a scared child hiding from monsters. Come to think of it, that's a pretty accurate comparison, she thought with a smile. Phew. I was worried there for a sec. I thought they had found me for sure. Luffy giggled as he sat down in Nami's chair. He turned the chair so that it was facing Nami. Are you sure they won't look in here for me? Luffy asked nervously. Nami nodded and held up the bottle of wine. She motioned towards the desk with her head. Don't worry, they won't look here. Here, sit this on my desk would y'all? She said as she tossed the bottle to Luffy. He caught it and sat it on the table behind him. Nami motioned for Luffy to join her over on the couch. She didn't want to chance him knocking the bottle over on her charts. She knew that he wouldn't, but she was paranoid about her charts. He got up and walked over to the couch and sat down next to Nami. He put his arm around her shoulders and leaned his head back against the cool wood of the wall. This is the library. There's nothing but books in here. I don't think you have ever been in this room. Why would you be in here now? Nami asked. Luffy giggled and nodded. She peeled off a piece of the tangerine and put it in front of Luffy's mouth. Here, open, she said, and Luffy opened his mouth. She popped the fruit into his mouth and he happily chewed away. He finished chewing and swallowed before answering. Thanks, Luffy said. Nami nodded. Yeah, I guess so. I guess I panicked when all three of them surrounded me. I felt weak. Nami flicked his head gently. Hey, you promised me you weren't going to talk like that anymore. Luffy smiled at Nami and opened his mouth for another piece of tangerine. Nami sighed and popped another piece into his mouth. Yeah, I know, he said as he chewed. Sorry, he swallowed and rubbed his head where Nami flicked him. He groaned. I'm so bored of hiding on my own ship. I'm the captain, I shouldn't have to hide from my crew. Nami smiled and took a sip of her wine. You know, Captain, you are welcome to get out of my library so that I can work in peace. She motioned towards the door. I'm sure that Frankie and Sanji would love to keep you occupied. Luffy shuddered and shook his head. "Nah, I think I'll hang out in here. You're in here and I like being around you," he said sweetly. Nami felt her cheeks warm up a little. She smiled and gave Luffy a quick kiss on the cheek before she got up and walked over to her desk. "Fine. But I have work that I have to get done. You need to behave, got it?" Nami ordered. Luffy nodded with a big smile on his face. "Luffy, I'm serious. As MVER there kissing you, I am behind schedule on my charts. I need you to leave me alone while I work, okay?" The grin on Luffy's face disappeared. As it vanished, Nami found herself wishing that it would come back. "Finna." Luffy pouted. "I guess it's better than being stuck in the doctor's room with Chopper." Nami looked up as she remembered something. "Oh, that reminds me." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small bottle of blue liquid. "Here, Luffy, it's from Chopper. He said you had to drink this." Luffy tilted his head and looked at the bottle. Suddenly he jumped up. "No way. I know what that is." He pointed his finger at the bottle in Nami's hand. "That's the stuff that tastes like mud, and it makes me sleepy." Nami looked at the bottle and laughed. "It's medicine, you nitwit. Your physical injuries aren't healed yet. You still have to take your medicine regardless of what it tastes like," Nami said as she walked over to Luffy. She handed him the bottle. "Drink or you get thrown out with the 3 savages." Luffy pouted as he took the bottle. Nami smiled and walked back towards the table. He opened the bottle and drank it. He stuck his tongue out in disgust. "Yuck, I don't like that stuff." "Oh, and 2," he said as he sat back down. Nami put her glasses on and turned her head towards Luffy in confusion. "2?" she asked. Luffy nodded. "Yeah, 2, only Frankie and Sanji." "Zoro's gone." Nami raised one of her eyebrows and Luffy laughed. "Zoro jumped off the ship a while ago. I guess he thought I went into the woods." Luffy giggled. Nami giggled with him and took another sip of her drink. The two sat there in the library talking until Luffy started dozing off. The medicine Chopper made was made to put Luffy asleep, which was fine. If he fell asleep in here, Nami could work and keep an eye on him. Nami turned towards her desk and began working. A few minutes later she looked over and saw Luffy passed out sleeping quietly. She smiled and got up from her desk. She walked over and kneeled down next to him. "Sleep tight, my king," she said as she kissed him. She stood up and went back to start working on her charts in peace. Robin returned to the ship far later than she should have. She had to be sure that no one was following her. As she approached the cove, she heard something moving around on the beach ahead of her. She slowly made her way through the trees and peeked out onto the beach. It was Usopp. The Mini Mary sat quietly a few feet offshore. Robin breathed a sigh of relief as she stepped out of the trees. "Longnose. Good, it's only you." Usopp turned and looked at her with a confused look. "I was a bit nervous there." Usopp walked towards her. "Hey Robin, are you alright?" Usopp asked, confused. "You look like you saw a ghost." Robin took a few breaths and tried to calm down. Usopp glanced towards the trees as if waiting for something to follow her out. After a few seconds he turned his attention back to Robin. "What's going on?" I was scared that I was being followed." Usopp let out a yelp and ran towards the tree line. He drew back his slingshot and scanned the area behind the trees. "I don't see anyone," he said after a few moments. "Brook is on patrol around an area that Nami and I planned out. I figured that he would be a good scout. His appearance might scare away anyone that ventures too close." He lowered his slingshot. "If you heard someone following you, it might have been him." Robin shook her head. "No, I mean from town. I was questioned by a man in town. He had a marine tattoo on his arm. I'm guessing that he was a recruit, but he was very suspicious of me." Robin shuddered. "I took a long route back that took me across most of the island. I did my best to make sure that I wasn't followed." Usopp glanced back at the tree line before looking back at Robin. "You were really scared about this. I can't remember the last time I saw you this spooked. Alright, come on, let's get back to the Sunny. I can smell Sanji cooking something." Robin agreed and the pair made their way over to the Mini Mary. They climbed in and returned to the ship. As they sailed towards the ship, Robin asked a question. "Longnose, what about Brook?" she asked calmly. Usopp laughed. "Ba, don't worry about him. You know he can run across water. He will be fine." Robin accepted his answer with a shrug as the Mini Mary began to dock with the Sunny. After securing the Mini Mary and closing the soldier dock system doors, Usopp and Robin made their way back onto deck. The first thing Robin realized as she climbed the ladder back onto deck was that she felt completely safe. Even if someone had followed her, Brook would have found them first. For a dusty old pile of bones, he was extremely reliable. Robin opened the hatch and climbed out. Usopp hadn't started climbing yet. He was doing something to the Mini Mary before he came up. Robin walked across the deck and stretched. The sun was high in the sky and Robin guessed it to be around 1:30 or so. She figured that it wasn't a bad time for a hot bath. She began walking towards the stairs. She heard a voice calling her name. "Hey Robin." "Hold up." It was Usopp. His head poked out of the hatch that she had just came out of. "Robin, you forgot this," he called as he tossed a bag over to her. It was the book and supplies that she had gone into town for. Robin was surprised that she had forgotten about them. She thanked Usopp and headed for Chopper's office. She was already late. There was no reason to be even later. As she walked past the kitchen, she could hear Chopper and Frankie talking to Sanji. She walked into the kitchen. "Hello everyone," she said politely. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Her remark was answered by a room full of no's and she smiled. Chopper jumped up and ran over to her. "Robin, there you are. I was worried that you got lost," the young reindeer said. "So were you able to find everything?" he asked, anxiously eyeing the bag in Robin's hand. She nodded. "Yes, doctor, I got everything on your list. Even the book." She handed everything to Chopper, who squealed in delight and ran off to his office. As he vanished, Robin sat down at the bar. She hadn't even sat down before Sanji had a glass in front of her. "Here you go, my love. I made it special just for you," he said with a gracious bow. Robin thanked him and took a drink of the juice. After the first drink she looked at it strangely. "Sanji, I was kind of hoping for that wine you got out this morning. Could I have some of that please?" Robin asked sweetly. Sanji collapsed on the floor and was practically in tears. He was unable to answer. Frankie laughed and answered for him. What cries a lot is trying to say is that Nami snatched the bottle and took it with her to work on her charts. That was a while ago though. If you head up to the library. Frankie stopped. A look of terror crossed his face. He quickly jumped out of his seat. "Oi Sanji, did you look in the library?" Sanji pulled himself up and looked at Frankie. "You have got to be kidding. Luffy? In the library? Are you out of your metal brain? He wouldn't go in there even if his life depended on it," the cook said as he poured himself a drink of the juice he had given to Robin. Frankie sat back down and put his head on his fist. Robin giggled. "Well, I wouldn't mind a bit of that wine. I can check for you while I'm up there." Just in case. Both men agreed and Robin took her glass and left. She exited the kitchen and walked up the stairs to the library. As she approached the door she reached out to open the door and stopped. She put her ear to the door and listened closely for any noise from inside. Hearing nothing, she frowned and knocked on the door just in case. After a few seconds she heard someone walking towards the door. The door opened a little bit and Nami's face violently appeared in the door, blocking Robin's view of the room behind her. "This had better be. Oh Robin," Nami said. Her tone changed dramatically as she realized who was at the door. Nami glanced around and then waved Robin in. Robin walked in and saw nails and pencils. Clearly she had been busy. As she scanned the rest of the room, her eyes stopped on the young man quietly sleeping on the couch. A smile crawled across Robin's lips. "Now I thought no one was allowed in here when you were working?" she asked. Robin crossed her arms and looked at Nami. Nami laughed and scratched her head as if looking for the correct response. "Well, he promised to behave and he had to take his medicine and that made him fall asleep," Nami said as she half laughed. Robin nodded. Still, I feel like he is probably the worst person for you to have in here when you are trying to work," she said, throwing Nami a wink. Nami's face turned beet red. No, that wouldn't. I mean." Nami sighed and looked down at the floor. "Why do you do this to me?" Nami asked with a smile. Robin shrugged. "Because I like teasing you, and I think that you two make an absolutely perfect couple. I dare say that you two were meant to be together." The older woman chuckled as Nami's face went even redder. "But never mind that. I'm just here for the wine, if you are done with it." Nami's looked up quickly and looked over to the edge of her desk where Luffy had sat it. It wasn't there. Huh. I could have sworn Luffy had left it on the table there. Nami looked around the room trying to find it. Robin cleared her throat to get her attention. Nami turned to her and saw Robin pointing towards the couch. Nami looked over and saw Luffy lying on the couch, with the bottle of wine a few feet away on the floor. Unopened, just the way she left it. When did he? She thought about it for a moment. It dawned on her. He must have brought it over to the couch to keep it out of my way. He was trying to help. A smile spread across her face and she walked over to the couch. As she bent over to pick up the bottle, she stopped to give Luffy another quick kiss. "Thanks," she said quietly, not caring that Robin was watching. She stood up and walked back over to Robin with the bottle. She handed it to the older woman. Robin took the bottle, said thanks and headed for the door. As she came closer to the door, she stopped and turned. "He is lovable, isn't he?" she said. Nami picked up her glasses and put them back on as she sat down. She smiled and looked at Robin. Hey, Nami said teasingly. "He's mine, back off," she said with a happy smile. Robin laughed and opened the door a little to leave. "Oh, don't worry, Miss Navigator, I have one already and frankly, mine's way cuter." As she finished her sentence, she quickly ducked out the door and closed it behind her. Nami could hear her laughing as she walked away from the library. Nami couldn't help but smile as she stole one more glance at Luffy before getting back to work on her charts. "Damn it," Zoro muttered as he stopped in the middle of a treeless clearing. He looked around and scoffed. "Now where the hell am I?" Chopper sat in his office dutifully reading the new book that Robin had brought him. The room was bathed in candlelight as Chopper had covered the windows in order to prevent outside interruptions. It seemed like he had been in the same room for hours. Chopper was running on very little sleep, but in his mind, Luffy was more important than sleep. Ever since he had gotten the book, his eyes had been plastered to it. His eyes were starting to hurt and he knew that he should take a break. He leaned back and closed his eyes. He was beginning to lose hope. The information in the book was not as helpful as he had hoped. He sighed and decided that he would read one more chapter, then he would stop to take a break. After a few minutes of motionless reading, Chopper jumped to his feet. "Here it is," he exclaimed happily. He began reading the chapter that he had found. As he read, his happy mood slowly drained away. After 5 paragraphs he pushed the book away and sat back down in his chair. He slumped back and stared at the wooden ceiling. So it's true. Dr. Vegapunk theorized this years ago. He sat back up and stared at the book. It was a journal written by a man who infiltrated the Navy 6 years ago in order to learn more about the mysterious Dr. Vegapunk. He tailed the world's smartest man for a year and a half, doing everything he could about the man and his research. Obviously, the man's actions were seen as treason towards the Navy. After a year and a half, the man was discovered, tortured and supposedly executed. During his undercover work, he had sent all of his findings to an unnamed man within the Revolutionary Army to have published. This was the only way to ensure that the truth of the Navy's horrible experiments would ever see the light of day. Unfortunately, most of the volumes that were published were hunted down and seized by the Navy. There was only one volume that the Navy allowed to exist. They believed that it was no danger to them as it only housed a number of Dr. Vegapunk's theories. Most of the theories mentioned within this book were already a reality anyway, so the Navy did not care about it. The only one that was not a reality was dubbed the cure for those who have been possessed by a devil fruit. The chapter explained that Dr. Vegapunk was truly convinced that a cure was possible. In fact, according to hints left throughout the chapter, progress on the experiment was already underway. However, this theory was never fully pursued. No one knows why Dr. Vegapunk suddenly abandoned the theory altogether, and the author did not mention anything else about it in this book. There were subtle hints that Dr. Vegapunk may have possessed a devil fruit himself and decided that he didn't want a cure for himself, but this is only speculation. Regardless, this book confirmed Chopper's theory and it may hold the key to saving Luffy. He pushed his chair away from the desk and stood up. If he supported the work, then he knew it could be done. There is a way to cure devil fruit users, Chopper said soberly. He shuddered as he thought about what would have happened if he had been hit by the poison. He shook his head to clear his thoughts. If the cure was developed in a lab, Then there must be a way to reverse the effects. If Dr. Vegapunk did it, so can I, he proclaimed proudly. Chopper jumped back into his seat and began reading again. He would use all of his knowledge to help his friend. Robin leaned against the railing of the sunny. She turned her face towards the sun. Its warm rays a pleasant respite from the cold weather of the island. As much as she'd love to sit on the deck in the sunlight and read one of her novels, she had other things on her mind. It had been some time since she had last seen Zoro and she was getting rather worried. Sanji had told her that Zoro had gone into the forest in order to find Luffy. Apparently, they were still fighting over who would train Luffy. The ridiculous squabble made Robin laugh. If any of them stopped to think about it, Luffy would never be agreed to letting one of his crew train him. He was too stubborn. Robin smiled and shook her head, her thoughts returning to Zoro. He was in the forest on a hostile Navy island. Not just any Navy island, Robin said grimly. The home to a Navy vice admiral. But of all the vice admirals it could have been, why did it have to be him? Robin prayed that the crew wouldn't have to face this man in combat. But that was a problem for another time. Zoro was wandering the forest that she had come through earlier. If someone had been following her, and he had noticed and intervened, things could get very messy for the crippled pirate crew. Robin decided that something had to be done. Zoro had to found as soon as possible. An altercation with the locals was inevitable if he stayed out there. Robin began planning out a way to hunt the swordsman down. Her thoughts were interrupted by someone calling to her. "Robin, my love," Sanji shouted as he flew across the deck. He skywalked across the deck until he landed right next to her. "I brought you some more of that wine you love almost as much as I love you," he said with hearts in his eyes. Robin giggled at the lovesick cook. She gracefully took the drink from him and took a drink. "Ah, wonderful. Thank you," she said. As the words left her lips, Sanji squealed in delight, falling to the floor. Robin took another drink before looking down at the man. "Hey Sanji," she asked. "Do you know where the others are?" Sanji jumped back onto his feet and brushed off his clothes. He pulled out his box of cigarettes and put one in his mouth. He lit it as he considered her question. I know Nami is in the library, and Brook is on patrol on the island." Sanji glanced up towards the sun, trying to estimate the time. "He should be on his way back now that I think about it." He took a long drag from his cigarette. Usopp is fishing near the opening to the cove. Frankie's below deck doing something. Chopper's in his office. Mosshead who cares, and Luffy is still Mia. "Why?" Robin pointed towards the island with her thumb. As she pointed, she saw Brook emerge from the forest. "Well, isn't Zoro on the island?" she asked. Sanji nodded. Robin knew he wouldn't be happy about the idea of trekking across the entire island to find Zoro, but she was sure that he would do it for her. As much as he supposedly hated the relationship that she and Zoro shared, Sanji would do whatever he could to make Robin happy. "Yeah, he's been out there since breakfast." After a brief moment, Sanji sighed and his head drooped. He took a short drag from his cigarette and slowly dropped down to his knees. "You're worried about that idiot and you want to find him." Sanji laid his hands on the ground in front of him and dropped his cigarette on the deck. The lit cigarette landed on a few blades of grass and they caught fire. Robin quickly stamped the flame out with her foot. An arm popped out of the ground and picked the cigarette off the grass deck before it could do any more damage. "Precisely," she said, holding the cigarette in her hand. Sanji sounded like he was ready to cry. She extended her hand to help Sanji to his feet. He looked up and smiled as she helped him up. "Think of it this way. We are in no shape to be running from the Navy right now, especially if we don't know where Luffy is. If our resident swordsman were to come across a group of Marines in the forest, it could be disastrous." Sanji nodded understandingly. Before he could answer, a familiar laugh echoed up the side of the ship. It was followed by a familiar voice. "Oh yes. I could see how such a situation would be bad," Brook said, happily pulling himself up onto deck. He laughed again as he walked over to the pair. His clothes were dirty from hours of walking through the forest. Robin couldn't help but think about how perfect Brook was for keeping people away from the cove. She didn't know the island culture very well, but she was willing to bet that evil skeletons were supposed to wander the forest. She noticed that Brook's legs were soaked from run. "I suggest that we should organize a rescue party immediately. I have had eyes in the forest all morning, but I sadly have not seen him." "Even though I do not have eyes," Brooke and Robin laughed at his joke as Sanji shook his head. A lot of help, that is, Sanji said, taking his cigarette back from Robin's hand. So we are going to be running blind. He could be anywhere on the island and we have no way to track him down. I don't like our odds. Robin, my sweet, are you sure we can't just leave him out there? He asked sweetly. Robin shook her head and smiled. Very well, Sanji exclaimed. If this beautiful woman wants to go on shore to find the… Sanji's head twitched in annoyance. Mosshead. Then I will get everyone back to the ship to help. I'll go grab Usopp now. He jumped into the air and flew away using his skywalk. Robin and Brooke watched him fly away and Brooke laughed. That is a most useful technique. Do you think he would teach me how to use it? He asked, lifting his foot. He jumps off of the air, yes? That's almost as useful as running across water. He laughed and turned towards Robin. She shook her head. I doubt it. He learned it during our separation and he won't talk about that time for some reason. Oh, by the way, Brooke, you have been watching the forest all morning, right? The skeleton nodded. Did you happen to see me while you were out there? Brooke nodded again. Why, yes. I noticed you not long after you entered the forest. My eyes may be old, but they can always detect a beautiful woman. Even though I have no eyes, he laughed, making another skull joke. Robin didn't laugh this time, so he stopped and continued. I assumed that you were heading back to the ship, but you were going the wrong way. I tried to catch up to you, but I became distracted. Robin looked at him in confusion. Distracted? By what? The skeleton laughed, picking up his cane sword. He slowly began pulling it out of its sheath. Another presence within the forest, Brooke said darkly. I saw few young men following you through the forest. I guessed them to be 14 or so. The perfect age to be terrified by talking skeleton walking towards them with a sword in his hand. Wouldn't you agree? He asked as he laughed hysterically. His answer confirmed Robin's fears, though. She had been followed from town. She hadn't expected her pursuers to be children, though. She was relieved that Brooke was able to scare them off, though. He probably reinforced the legends of the forest being haunted too. Brooke continued talking, but Robin tuned him out, remembering her excursion into town. No little kids stood out in her memory, but she could remember the faces of every adult she saw with perfect clarity. She would have to be more careful next time. One thing still bothered her, though. She tried to remember if anyone in town had mentioned the vice admiral that called this island home. There were several stores and even a street named after him, but no one mentioned him being on the island. Her thoughts were again interrupted by Brooke poking her. Robin? Are you alright? Brooke asked, snapping her back to the conversation. Brooke laughed. I am sorry. You spaced out on me there for a moment. Robin smiled. A loud thud from below deck stopped any further conversation between the two pirates. They turned in time to see the hatch leading to the lower deck open with a loud crash. Frankie slowly pulled himself out of the hatch. He grabbed the top of the hatch and slammed it close. Robin couldn't help but laugh at his appearance. The cyborg was soaking wet, covered in sawdust. He had chunks of wood sticking out of his hair and a screwdriver was sticking out of his mouth. He looked particularly angry too. He spit out the screwdriver, which stabbed into the ground, and pointed at Robin and Brooke. Hey, you two. Where the hell is that little turd Usopp? I don't know what the hell he has been doing below deck, but it's a freaking mess down there. There's freaking sawdust everywhere and he left the solder dock system door open. I fell in the damn water. Have you ever seen a super cyborg fall into the water? It's not a pretty sight, he shouted. Brooke fell to the floor rolling with laughing and Robin giggled. Frankie was about to yell again when Sanji came flying back. He landed on the deck near Robin. All done, my darling, he said with a quick bow. Usopp is on his way here now. He motioned towards Chopper's office. I guess we should leave Chopper alone, and I wouldn't dare enter the library while Nami Swan is working. So other than Frankie, this is all we have. He looked over at Frankie. Oh hey Frankie, Robin wants you up on deck. She needs to talk to everyone, so get your ass up there. He raised an eyebrow at the cyborg. You look like hell. Did you get into an argument with a pile of wood? He asked seriously. Frankie looked at Sanji. I'm already talking to her. Open your eyes, damn it. Frankie shouted. Usopp climbed up the ladder onto the deck. He was out of breath. Damn it, Sanji, he said as he struggled to catch his breath. If this is so important, why did you make me run all back? Couldn't you have carried me? Sanji shook his head and walked over to Robin. No, I don't carry men, he said, motioning towards Robin. I will only carry a lady as I carry her into the sunset, after a romantic picnic on the beach. Anyway, Frankie said, stopping Sanji before he could continue. As he spoke, he began pulling chunks of wood out of his hair. The cook said you wanted to see everyone, right, Robin? Robin nodded. Yes. We have a problem that could easily escalate if we do not deal with it soon. Zoro is still on the island. We don't know where he is, and I don't think that he will be able to find his way back on his own. Brook coughed. Pardon me, Robin, but I saw Zoro walking towards the northern side of the island while I was on my way here. Sanji lifted his foot and fired a kick at Brook, which he dodged with a laugh. You freaking moron. You told us that you never saw him. Brook shrugged. I forgot. Sanji roared and fired more kicks at the skeleton, which were easily dodged. Robin wasn't sure if he was actually trying to hit him or not. She cleared her throat and smiled. Well, that gives us an area to start looking. Thank you, Brook. The 5 of us will search the northern section of the island, slowly widening our search area until one of us finds him. Everyone except Sanji and Brook agreed. Now, before we leave, I have to tell you why it is so important to avoid an altercation with the Navy on this island. Sanji and Brook stopped fighting as the crew listened intently to Robin. She told them about the Vice Admiral and how much of a threat he was to them. As she finished, Usopp and Brook were shaking in fear. Sanji stood silent with his cigarette, contemplating what Robin had just told them. Frankie nodded, pushing his sunglasses up onto his forehead. Okay, so find the swordsman before the Navy does. Got it? Frankie said. This Vice Admiral sound like bad news though, Sanji spoke up. I'll say. His devil fruit sounds like trouble. Robin, do you know if he is on the island or not? Robin shrugged. Hopefully not. His power may be more than we can handle at this point. It's best if just avoided any chance of meeting him. Everyone agreed and set off to search for Zoro. Only 2 of the group stayed behind while the others made their way to the island. It was a race against time. Zoro had to be found. This is a waste of my damn time, Sanji said as he calmly strolled through the forest. He looked up towards the tops of the trees. He could see sunlight peeking through the leaves. He sighed and continued walking. I say we leave Mosshead out here by himself. Maybe he will learn something about letting moss grow on his brain. Sanji gritted his teeth. He had a headache and this search wasn't helping. But this is what Robin wanted. If she wanted to bring Zoro back unharmed, then Sanji was going to do everything he could to bring him back unharmed. Mostly unharmed. As he walked, a chill ran up his spine. What Robin said bothers me too. As he replayed, her Wu appeared from the forest. Oh, it's only eyebrows. I don't care then, Zoro said as he walked right past Sanji. Sanji was so lost in thought that he didn't even register Zoro's presence. The distance between the 2 men grew. Suddenly Sanji froze. He spun around and pointed at Zoro. Hey you idiot, wait! Sanji shouted. He broke into a run as he chased Zoro. Zoro ignored him and kept walking. Sanji ran past him and stepped in front of him to cut off his walk. Oi Mosshead. Robin wants you back at the ship. I don't know why she cares so much, but she's worried about you. If you were a real man you wouldn't make her worry so much, Sanji scolded. He stood staring at the place where Zoro had been a second ago. It took him several seconds to realize that Zoro was gone. Sanji spun around and saw Zoro had taken a random left turn. What the hell? He grumbled as he ran after Zoro again. He ran ahead of Zoro again and cut him off again. Did you really just walk past me without listening to a word I said? Zoro nodded. Yep. And I'm going to do it again. I don't have time to stand here and be lectured by you about my relationship, he said without looking at Sanji. Zoro stepped around Sanji and kept walking. Stunned, Sanji could only stand there staring forward. Zoro stopped in front of a large tree. He scratched his head. Damn. Have I been here already? No, probably not. Zoro turned and started walking again. Sanji face-palmed and turned to face Zoro. Are you seriously this dense? He asked in shock. I think you're worse than Luffy. Sanji sighed and ran to catch up to Zoro. Instead of stepping in front of the wandering swordsman, Sanji opted to grab his shirt and stop him from walking. Okay, fine. I'll talk so you can understand me. You. Go. Back. Ship. Sweet. Robin. Worried. Zoro smacked Sanji's hand away and violently pointed at him. "What the hell do you think I'm doing?" he shouted. "I would have been back by now if you weren't constantly bugging me." Sanji let out a short fake laugh. "You can't blame your stupidity on me. If you have no sense of direction, that's not my fault. I'm only here to bring you back to the ship." Zoro huffed and began walking again. "I don't need your help to find our ship. Go catch a beetle and make some spider dinner, would you?" Zoro yelled as he continued walking. Sanji's face turned red with anger and he lunged at Zoro. "That's it, I am going to kick your ass right here right now," he shouted and lunged at Zoro. Zoro randomly turned again and Sanji sailed past him, slamming into a tree. The tree fell over, crushing several smaller trees as it fell. It slammed into the ground with a reverberating crash. Sanji poked his head out of the mess of trees. "Ah, Robin. I found you," Zoro said politely. Sanji picked himself out of the pile of trees, watched Robin and Zoro walking in the direction of the sunny, arm in arm, chatting away happily. Sanji sighed in annoyance and stood up, dusting himself off. He lit another cigarette and began following the pair through the forest. Mission accomplished. Nami sighed happily and took off her glasses. Perfect. All done. She stood up and stretched. She walked over to the window and looked outside. Wow, the sun isn't even setting yet. I finished those really fast. She turned away from the window and walked back to her desk. She looked at the mess that she had left in her wake. Papers and pencils littered the floor, and rulers and straight edges were tossed in every direction. "Holy crap," she said aloud. "I was seriously focused on finishing my charts. I didn't even realize that I made this much of a mess." She spent the next few minutes cleaning and organizing her desk. The whole time she was cleaning, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was forgetting something. Suddenly it hit her. Nami spun around to see if Luffy had woken up. She was surprised to see that he was no longer where she left him. The couch was empty and Luffy was nowhere to be seen. "Huh," she said. "When did he leave? I don't remember him getting up or walking out." A look of worry crossed her face. "I hope he didn't try to talk to me. I was so focused on my charts that he probably thought I was ignoring him." She walked over to the ladder that led up to the bathroom. She climbed the ladder and peeked around. No Luffy there either. So he had to have walked out the door back onto deck. She jumped off the ladder and headed for the door. That moron has probably been ambushed by those morons again. He shouldn't have left the library. She stopped and smiled. Then again, it is Luffy. He hates being bored. If I was ignoring him, then he would have left to find something else to entertain himself. She shrugged and walked out into the afternoon sunlight. She stretched again as she felt the warm light hit her body. She listened for any sound that could have been Luffy in trouble, but all she heard was talking. Nami walked to the steps that led back onto deck and gazed down. Usopp and Frankie were standing on the grass deck talking. Frankie was a mess and looked angry about something. No Sanji, no Robin, no Zoro, no Brook, no Chopper, and no Luffy. Where was everyone? She proceeded down the stairs and onto the grass deck. She stopped for a moment, enjoying the feeling of the grass between her toes. After a few seconds, she continued and called out to the two men. "Hey Frankie, Usopp." Both men stopped talking and turned towards the young woman. "Are you guys the only ones on board?" Frankie nodded. "Sure are. Wait." He scratched his head for a moment thinking. "No, Chopper is in his office. Other than him and you, yeah. Just super us." Nami sighed happily, knowing that Chopper was so dedicated to finding a way to help Luffy. Not knowing where he was worried Nami though. She wished that he had stayed with her in the library. Usopp cleared his throat. "Yeah, everyone else left to find Zoro. He's lost on the island. We didn't want to bother you about it though," he said, shrugging. Nami scowled. "That idiot," she stomped her foot. "Doesn't he realize that we are way too close to a navy base for him to be wandering off? He's going to lead them right to us," she said angrily. Frankie laughed. "If he can find his way back. That's why everyone thought it was super important to go and look for him." Frankie walked over to the railing. "Well, now that you are here, I guess I'll go and help the search. They're taking way too long anyway. I'll be back later." "Longnose, don't touch anything," he threatened as he jumped off the deck and landed on something next to the ship. Nami heard the sound of the Mini Mary heading towards the island. She shook her head and turned to walk away. She was hungry. She figured she could find something to munch on and then go find Luffy. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she stopped. She turned around and looked back at Usopp. He was sitting on the bench that surrounded the main mast. "Hey Usopp, why aren't you out there helping too?" she asked. He shrugged. "I came down with too close to a Navy base itis this morning. It's best if I stayed here where it's safe," he said proudly. Whatever," Nami said, shaking her head. "I don't care, do whatever you want." She walked up the stairs massaging her temples. As she approached the kitchen she heard a loud thud from the doctor's office. Puzzled by the sudden noise, she made her way to Chopper's office and knocked on the door. She waited for a response but got none. "Hey Chopper, you okay in there?" she asked as she opened the door slowly. She pushed the door open and walked in. Nami gasped at the sight that she found in front of her. Chopper's office was a mess. His desk had been overturned and papers littered the floor. His chair looked like it had been thrown against the far wall and the little reindeer himself was huddled in a corner crying. Nami ran over to him and kneeled down next to him. "Chopper, what's going on? What's wrong?" Chopper shook his head. "No Nami. I can't do it," he said as tears streamed down his face. "I can't. I'm not." The rest of his sentence was lost among his sobs. "Can't what?" she asked cautiously. I can't do it. I promised, but I can't." He was sobbing uncontrollably but Nami couldn't help him without knowing what he meant. "Chopper, it's okay. Just calm down and tell me what's wrong," she said, reaching forward. She tried to hug Chopper but he cried out before she could. "I can't heal Luffy," he shouted, pushing Nami away. She fell backwards and landed on her butt. Chopper stood up and transformed into his heavy point. "I can't do it. I don't have the resources that damned Vegapunk has. How can I ever hope match his work without his data, without his knowledge?" Chopper roared and punched a wall, breaking a large hole in it. Sunlight poured into the room, illuminating the massive reindeer. He stood there breathing heavily for a few seconds before reverting back to his original form. He grabbed his hoof that he had punched the wall with. "Ow," he said quietly. Nami sat stunned for a few seconds just watching the doctor. She blinked a few times before shaking her head. "Chopper, is that what you are so worked up about?" She pulled herself to her feet and took a step forward. She didn't want to get too close in case he went crazy again. Nami smiled. "That's okay. You don't need his research. You can find something on your own. You're just as smart as Vegapunk is," Nami said sweetly, trying to calm the reindeer down. Chopper's eyes snapped open and he pointed a hoof at Nami. "No, you don't understand. It is impossible for me to trace his exact process. In order to reverse this poison, I need to know how it was made. I have no way of understanding a process that I know nothing about. It would take me literally years to replicate the Navy's results. Then I would have to find a way to reverse the process and..." He sobbed as he grabbed his hat and pulled it down over his eyes. Tears started rolling down his face again. I don't even know if I can reverse it." He let go of his hat and looked back up at Nami. "I don't have the lab, I don't have the research, I don't have a starting place. I don't have anything. I'm sorry Luffy." Chopper began wailing as he fell forward crying again. Nami walked over and kneeled down next to Chopper, trying to think of a way to calm him down. She was just about to speak when a voice calm echoed through the room. The sound of the voice even made Chopper stop crying. "So, you guys can't fix me," the voice said. Nami's blood ran cold and her head slowly rose to the hole in the wall that Chopper had made. On the other side of the ruined wall stood Luffy, his hat tilted to cover his eyes. Her eyes widened in shock. "I see," Luffy said coldly. Nami slowly began standing up. "Luffy," she said quietly as she reached her hand out towards him. She was mortified. She had promised him that they could find a way to help him, and he had just heard Chopper say that there was nothing he could do. She broke her promise to him. She was nearly to her feet when Luffy spoke again. "If you two can't help me," he said quietly as if he was talking to himself, "then I will have to help myself." Nami froze. "Luffy, it's okay. Chopper's just a bit overwhelmed." She was cut off by Luffy raising his hand. "No, it's fine. You guys can't do it. I'm broken and you can't fix me." "I get it," he said slowly. His eyes were still covered. Nami thought she saw a tear on his cheek, but Luffy turned away before she could see it. Nami was about to speak again when Luffy cut her off. I get it, he said again. Luffy raised his hand and placed it on top of his hat. He pulled it down further over his face. Nami stood half kneeling in silence, not sure what she should do. She stood up and glanced at the door. If she could get around to him, maybe she could do something. Nami began inching toward the door. She froze as Luffy spoke again. You guys have your own dreams. All of you. His hands fell to his sides. You need a strong captain to help you reach your dreams. Luffy clenched his hands into fists. I'm not strong. Not like this. I will only hold you guys back. Nami shook her head as she took another step towards the door. And no, that's not true. You're a strong captain. Our friend. My boyfriend. She said. You could never hold us back. Luffy let out a half-hearted laugh. What good am I? Who can I protect if I'm broken? A captain must be strong, and I'm not. Luffy began walking forward. I'm sorry, he said and broke out into a run. Nami gasped and kicked the door down. She ran around the corner trying to catch Luffy. Wait, Luffy, stop please. She ran after him. Her eyes widened as she saw him standing on the railing at the back of the ship. Stop please. Don't jump, she screamed as she ran towards him. She knew that he was faster than her even without his powers. As she screamed again, Luffy bent his knees and pushed off the railing of the ship. He pushed himself off in the direction of the island. He fell towards the water. Nami screamed again. Luffy, no, you can't swim. Stop, she ran into the railing and watched in horror as Luffy swam towards the island. Luffy quickly reached the shore and walked onto the sand. Luffy, wait. Nami screamed as she jumped over the railing and into the cold water. She swam as fast as she could towards the shore. Nami's blood was racing as she ran onto shore and stood up. She was freezing now, but she didn't care. She quickly scanned the shore trying to find Luffy. Luffy? Where are you? She screamed at the island. As her eyes scanned the beach, her eyes fell upon something sitting in the sand. She ran over to it. As she grew closer, she realized what it was and fell into the sand inches from the object. She pulled herself to her knees and looked at the object. Tears filled her eyes as she stared at it. No, she whispered. It was Luffy's straw hat. It laid upside down in the sand, as if he had threw it to the ground before he disappeared. Nami reached forward and grabbed the brim of the hat. She slowly pulled it to herself. She stared at the hat as tears streamed down her face. Luffy. No. Please come back. Don't go. Nami whispered as she held the hat to her chest. She squeezed the hat tightly against her. Tears poured out of her eyes all over Luffy's hat. He was gone. He ran away leaving her behind. Luffy was gone. Nami sat on the shore crying until the rest of the crew returned. It was late in the afternoon when the crew members that had went onto the island to find Zoro finally returned to the Sunny. They came back to find Nami crying on the beach clutching Luffy's hat to her chest. Robin decided that it wasn't a good idea to try and get answers out of her, so they took her to the ship and decided to talk to the only other people that could help, Usopp and Chopper. Sanji, Frankie, Brook and Zoro went to find them while Robin comforted Nami. The four men found their crew members inside of Chopper's ruined office. It was still a mess from Chopper's breakdown, so he and Usopp were trying to clean it up. Sanji was the first one to step into the office. "Oh, Usopp, Chopper, what the hell is going on?" Sanji snapped as he stormed into the room. Usopp and Chopper jumped back, startled by Sanji's sudden entrance. Sanji's cigarette was burned intensely, matching his furious demeanor. "What did you dumbasses do? We found my precious Nami on the beach crying her eyes out. I am going to kick both of your asses if I find out that you two hurt her," he shouted, stepping towards them. Usopp and Chopper forced themselves up against the back wall. They were too scared to answer Sanji's accusations. Sanji took this as an admission of guilt. He stepped forward to attack them, but Frankie cut him off with his arm. "Hold up there, brother," Frankie said calmly. "Scaring the super shit out of these two won't help. Look at them," he said, motioning towards the two men cowering in the corner. "They are so scared they can't even talk. That's no way to get info out of anyone. Try being nice to something without for once." Frankie smirked as he stepped in front of Sanji. He was about to speak again when his eyes were pulled toward the large hole in the wall. Frankie's eyes widened as he realized that his precious ship had been damaged. As he stared, a large chunk of wood broke off and fell to the floor. He winced and slowly turned his head towards Usopp and Chopper. "Chopper." "Usopp," Frankie said menacingly. "What the hell did you dumbasses do to my ship? Look at that hole." Usopp and Chopper were pushed up against the back wall that they were practically breaking the wall. They wanted to put as much room as possible between them and the angry cyborg. Frankie's shouting was drowned out by Sanji as he jumped forward. "Hey," Sanji shouted as he pointed back towards the door. "Your damn wall isn't nearly as important as my Nami swan. Forget that damned thing and be more worried about a beautiful lady for once," Frankie responded with even more yelling. As the two men continued shouting, a cold breeze drifted through the room. The cold breeze seemed to calm the raging men. The weather on the island was cold, but this breeze was colder than anything that they had seen since landing on the island. The breeze was as cold as death. "Now gentlemen," Brook said as he calmly walked in between Frankie and Sanji. His sword was drawn and pointing at the ground next to his feet. The cold air followed Brook as he walked and the men were able to see their breath in his wake. "There is no need for all this yelling. Something ill has occurred while we were away and our only source of information is cowering in the corner." Brook slowly resheathed his blade and turned to face Sanji and Frankie. "Please calm down." Frankie sighed and nodded. He went to examine the slowly growing hole in the wall. He put his hand on the wall and took a close look at the hole. I guess it's not that bad," he said under his breath. He picked up a large piece of wall off the ground and frowned. Another piece broke off the wall and Frankie visibly winced again. Brook nodded and turned to Sanji. Sanji closed his eyes and shook his head without another word. He took a long drag from his cigarette. Brook nodded and turned to Usopp and Chopper. "So," he said as he walked over to the men and extended his hand to help them up. "What is going on? Why was Nami on the beach crying?" Usopp took Brook's hand and stood up. He spoke first. "I'm not entirely sure what happened," he said, keeping a close eye on Sanji as he spoke. "I was sitting on deck after you guys left. I heard people talking, but I didn't think much of it." He shrugged. "Then I heard Nami screaming, so I ran up here. By the time I got here, she was already swimming towards the island. She looked like she was in a panic." He shook his head and frowned. "I came in here to see if Chopper was okay. He was pretty shaken up too. That's all I know," Usopp said quietly. Sanji snapped his head around. "Why didn't you go after?" He was cut off by Brook clearing his throat. Brook glared at Sanji for a moment, then turned his head to Chopper. "I see. Chopper, can you fill us in?" Chopper stayed silent for a moment and then nodded. He took a deep breath before speaking. "It's my fault. I told Nami there was nothing I could do for Luffy and he heard it." Tears began welling up in the reindeer's eyes. He knew that I couldn't help him. Luffy ran off and Nami ran after him. After that, Chopper's eyes shifted to the round and he couldn't finish his sentence. Brook nodded. Frankie shifted his attention away from the wall. Then Luffy went to the island and ditched his hat along the way. Nami chased him and found his hat on the beach. I'm guessing we showed up not long after that. He shook his head and walked away from the wall. This sucks. Luffy is out there alone and without his powers. Why couldn't he have done this while we were out there? Now we have to go back out there and find him before he does something stupid. Zoro, who had been leaning against the doorframe this whole time, finally spoke. You're right. He stood up and walked out of the door. We have to go find our captain. He's in no shape to be alone out there. Sanji laughed. No way, Moss Head. You aren't going anywhere. Sanji said, pointing a finger at Zoro. The last thing we need is you getting lost again. And I'm not comfortable leaving Nami alone on this ship with you. You might try to take advantage of her in her delicate condition. Besides, this is Luffy we are talking about. He will be fine. He's just upset. Give him a few hours and he will be back for dinner. Zoro glared at Sanji. Your lack of concern for our captain's safety sounds like mutiny to me, he said quietly. Before Sanji could respond, Frankie stepped in between them. Not now, you two. Do this another time. He motioned for everyone to follow him. He turned and walked out the door back onto deck. Before we make any decisions, let's see what Robin and Nami want to do. As they all exited the office, they heard a voice from below them on the grass deck. Hey morons, get down here. We have a serious problem. Nami called. She was standing on deck next to Robin. Her eyes were still red from crying, but she seemed to be calm enough to yell at everyone. The men walked onto the deck and stood opposite the women. Once he stopped walking, Sanji noticed that Nami was wearing Luffy's straw hat. It hung around her neck, resting on her back. He guessed that that was where that hat was going to stay until they found Luffy. Nami shook her head. "You idiots are wasting time. While you are all up there yelling at each other, Luffy is in trouble. He's on the island and we need to find him," Nami ordered. Frankie nodded. "Okay, so how are we going to find him?" Finding Zoro was super easy since we knew what direction he went. "We have no clue where Luffy went," Frankie pointed out. Usopp jumped up. "Oh, I know, in order to find Luffy, we need to think like Luffy," he said heroically. He turned to Nami and stuck out his hand. "Nami, quick, give me Luffy's hat. That will help me solve his caper before anything scary happens." Usopp froze in place as he looked into Nami's eyes. The young woman glared so ferociously at Usopp that it nearly hurt him. Usopp had crossed a line and he knew it. She looked like she was about to rip his face off. Usopp quickly dropped his hand as Nami spoke. "No one touches his hat. It stays with me until we find him. Got it?" she growled. Usopp could hear every single word she spoke. He took a few steps back. Sorry. Bad idea. Forget I said anything," he gulped. He still felt threatened, so he quickly changed the subject. "Okay, new plan. If I was Luffy, where would I go?" Brook jumped in the air, raising his hand. "Oh, I know this one," the skeleton said, still jumping into the air. "If I was Luffy, I would find the closest place that had meat," Brook laughed. Usopp and Chopper joined him. Nami sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose in annoyance. As she was getting ready to yell at them again and continue, a voice echoed out across the ship. "Excuse me?" the voice shouted. It was the voice of a young man. Zoro's hand instinctively went to the hilt of one of his swords and he turned towards the side of the ship where the voice had originated. He walked towards the railing with Nami following close behind. Sanji motioned for everyone else to stay quiet as he joined the others at the railing. Standing on the shore was a young man. Nami estimated him to be about 16 years old. As they stopped at the railing, the man spoke again. "All good, someone's home. I was worried that I was calling to an empty ship." Zoro and Sanji glared at the stranger in silence. This was bad. Someone from town had found where they were hiding. If something wasn't done, this guy could run back to the town and tell everyone where they were. They would have the Navy on them within the hour. The man shifted uncomfortably. "Friendly people. Well, if no one's going to speak, I guess I will. I was wondering if you could answer me a question." Sanji looked at Nami. She gave him a barely noticeable nod. Sanji chewed on his cigarette and looked back towards the man. "What do you want?" Sanji asked. His expression was dead serious and his eyes never left the man. Sanji knew that this would only end badly. "Well, I was wondering if you guys have business on the island. We don't like strangers hanging around our sacred forest." He motioned to the forest around him. "This whole area is deeply sacred to our city. It's said that the souls of those who die on this island come here to rest." The man laughed. "Sorry, I'm getting off subject. My point is, most travelers or merchants who come to this island do it through the main docks on the front of the island. No one ever hides like cowards in the woods that most people never enter. Now you guys have been hiding out here for a few days, and yes, we have been watching you. The way we look at it," an evil smile came across the man's face. "Only one kind of person would hide like this. You people," he pointed his finger at Sanji. "Are pirates?" Zoro tightened his grip on the sword a bit and Nami tensed up but said nothing. Sanji never broke eye contact with the man. "What if we are?" he asked sternly. The man laughed and scratched his head. "Well then," the young man said with a devious smile, "I am going to bring the wrath of the Marines down upon you and your ship." Nami gasped quietly and covered her mouth with her hand. She took a few steps back and threw the others a nervous glance. Sanji and Zoro looked at each other and nodded in understanding. Zoro slid his sword back into its sheath. They both knew exactly what they should say. "Then it's a good thing we aren't pirates," Zoro said, closing his eyes. He silently apologized to Luffy. He knew that Luffy would be furious about them hiding the fact that they were pirates. However, until they could find him, they couldn't leave. Zoro and Sanji had to stall for as much time as possible. Zoro began explaining to the man that they were simple travelers while Sanji glanced back at Nami. "Nami, Robin," he said quietly. "We need to find Luffy now. Can you go into the forest and find him?" Both women nodded in unison. Sanji smiled at the girls and then glanced over to Usopp. His smile faded. "Usopp, go with them." Usopp jumped back in surprise. "Me? Why me?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Why can't someone else go?" Sanji turned and stared at Usopp. They didn't have time for him to screw around. "Because you're faster than the others. I'm sure this guy is with the Marines, so he already knows who we are." He motioned to Zoro. "I need Frankie, Brook, Chopper and Moss Head here to defend the ship if they come looking for us. You and the girls can find Luffy faster than anyone else can." He turned back to the railing and walked forward. Robin and Nami ran towards the opposite railing. Usopp began to object but decided against it. He nodded and joined them. Sanji looked over his shoulder and smiled. "Now go. Find Luffy and get back here as soon as you can. We will stay here for as long as we can." Nami, who had just begun to climb over the railing, stopped and looked at Sanji. "Whoa, wait, what does that mean?" she snapped at him. Sanji and Zoro were already at the other railing staring at the stranger. He didn't answer her. Nami started walking forward. "Hey Sanji, what do you mean you will stay here as long as you can? Answer me." Someone behind Nami laid their hand on her shoulder. "Come on, Miss Navigator," Robin said calmly. "We don't know how long we have until the Marines storm this cove. We need to find Luffy quickly and get back." Nami bit her lower lip and hesitated. After a moment she nodded. Nami followed Robin over to the other side of the ship. They joined Usopp and the three of them jumped over the railing and landed on the shore. They ran off into the forest to find their captain and bring him home. Sanji watched as the women jumped over the railing. He sighed once they were out of view. He turned to Zoro. While he had been talking to the crew, the man had left. "Hey Moss Head," he said and Zoro grunted in response. "How long do you think we have?" Zoro turned and walked back towards the center of the ship. "Not long." He drew two of his swords. "That guy is going straight to the Navy base. I'm sure of it." He lifted his sword and pointed at the forest. "This whole cove is going to be overrun by sunset." Brook and Frankie joined them. Frankie spoke up first. "Not to make this super situation more complicated, but we aren't exactly in a good position to be fighting." Zoro was about to respond when Frankie continued. "Geologically speaking. Think about it. This cove only has 2 exits. If the Navy blocks both of them, we are seriously screwed." Chopper shook in fear. "But Frankie, couldn't you just coup de burst us through the trees? I mean there aren't that many trees between us and the open sea." Chopper asked hopefully. Frankie shook his head. "I doubt it. These trees are pretty thick. Sure we could try, but we would probably damage the hull of the ship. Besides, even if we did make it though, we wouldn't fly as far. We would still be easy prey for the Marines." He sighed. "No, the only way we are going to be able to make it out of here is through one of the 2 openings. I hate to say it, but we may have screwed ourselves by coming in here." Sanji nodded. "Exactly. So we can only wait for the girls in the cove for so long. If it gets too hot in here, we will need to move out to the open sea. Preferably before they seal us in." Sanji gritted his teeth in anger. "I hate the idea of making this any harder for the girls, but we have no choice. If the Sunny sinks, we are all done for." Zoro laughed. "What the useless cook said," he said as he raised one of his swords to the sky. "We need to hold this position as long as possible." He lowered his sword so that it was pointing back towards the island. "Bring it on, Marines. I'll cut every last one of you to ribbons," he stated with an evil grin. Sharp branches scratched at Nami's legs as she ran through the forest. She felt her skin slice open in a few places but she ignored it. She had to find Luffy as soon as possible. It had been less than an hour since he took off but he could be anywhere on the island by now. She didn't have time to be worried. They were in a race against time, and time was winning. As she ran, Nami heard Usopp making noises behind her. He was whining about the sharp branches and darkness of the forest floor. He was saying so he decided to ignore him. "Hey Nami," Usopp called frantically, "this is ridiculous. We are going too fast. If he is in the forest somewhere, we will run right past him at this rate." Nami chose not to respond and continued running. Usopp grew more annoyed. "Hey Nami," he called again. He received the same response as before. As much as it annoyed her to admit it, Nami knew that Usopp was right. Luffy could have been sitting at the base of a tree somewhere and she would have completely missed him. However, if he saw her running through the forest like a maniac, he would stop her, she was sure of it. Nami's thoughts were broken when her foot caught a root that was sticking out of the ground. It snagged her foot and she fell to the ground with a dull thud. Pain shot through her shoulder as it dragged through some small rocks on the rough forest floor. She knew that her shoulder was cut up pretty badly from the fall, but that didn't matter. Nami picked herself up and steadied herself. She glanced at her shoulder. It was red and the skin was broken. Blood was oozing out of it, but she ignored it. She quickly realized that Usopp was standing next to her. "Hey Nami," Usopp called, waving his hand in front of her face. "Are you in there? Are you okay? That was a nasty fall." Nami blinked and focused on him. She reached her hand up to her shoulder and rubbed it. She felt warm blood coating her fingers. Yeah. Sorry." She nodded, letting go of her shoulder. "Come on, let's go," she said as she started to run again. Her run was halted when Usopp grabbed her arm. "Whoa there. I'm trying to make sure you are okay here," Usopp said, holding onto her arm. "Just hold up for a sec, would y'all?" Nami huffed and turned to glare at Usopp. "We don't have time to wait. I'm fine and we need to find Luffy now," she said, smacking his arm away. She turned to start running again when she saw an eye and mouth on a nearby tree. "Miss Navigator, long nose," Robin's disembodied mouth said. It was at the moment that Nami remembered that Robin wasn't with them anymore. Robin had decided to fill the forest with her eyes and ears rather than run around the entire island like an idiot. "We don't have much time. I found Luffy. He's to the south of you right now. It looks like he's heading for the Navy base," she said, her voice filled with distress. "The Navy base?" Usopp screamed. Nami's blood ran cold. "Why is he heading there?" she exclaimed. "That's practically suicide." Robin's eye closed. "I have no idea," Robin admitted. "I tried talking to him, but he completely ignored me. I tried grabbing him, but he dodges my hands before they grab him. Without actually being there, I can't get him." "Nami, you have to go and get him." Nami looked at Robin, confused. "Just me? What, aren't you guys coming?" Nami asked. Robin's eye opened. "No, while I was scouting the forest, I found a small army of Marines marching through the woods. They looked like they are heading for the Sunny," she said coldly. Usopp screamed. "Clearly, they have been planning to march on the cove for some time. Longnose and I need to go back to the ship to warn the others and help protect the ship." Nami shook her head. "I can't," she exclaimed. "Luffy's a lot stronger than me. I can't bring him home by myself." Robin's eye vanished, but her mouth remained. "It has to be you, Nami. You know him better than anyone else ever has. He trusts you more than anyone else." Robin's mouth smiled. "He loves you," Robin said gently. "If you can't bring him home, then no one can." Nami closed her eyes. The wind blew through the trees and she felt Luffy's hat bouncing in the wind. Robin was right and Nami knew it. She thought about the last few days with Luffy and she smiled. He did love her and she loved him. Nami took a deep breath and looked up. "You're right," Nami said. Her voice was focused and determined. She was going to bring him back, whether he liked it or not. She turned to Usopp. "Get back to the ship and wait for us there." She smiled. "Luffy and I will be there soon." Usopp nodded. "Are you going to be okay?" Usopp asked. Nami nodded. "Yeah, don't worry about me." She shooed him away with her hands. "Now go. Keep the ship safe for us." Usopp wished her luck and ran back towards the ship. Nami looked back at Robin's mouth but instead saw an arm pointing to the right. Nami smiled and nodded. She turned and began running faster than before. She knew where he was and she was coming for him. "Wait for me, king of the pirates," she shouted. "Your queen is coming to bring you home." The sun was dropping lower in the sky and the island was bathed in a light orange hue. It was peaceful for everyone on the island of Cardio. It seemed that every person on the island was finishing up their normal everyday lives and were heading home for a relaxing evening with their families. Nearly every person on the island was ready for an uneventful evening followed by a peaceful night. However, not everyone on the island was so lucky. Sanji stood on the deck of the Sunny watching the sky beginning to change color. He took a long drag from his cigarette and exhaled it slowly. He turned his head and slowly gazed around the cove. He knew it was only a matter of time before the entire cove was swarming with Marines baying for their blood. This island was already crawling with Marines. Word of their presence and exact location had already reached the Marines. How long would it take for them to reach the secluded cove? A chill ran up his back as Sanji thought about an army swarming over the peaceful cove. He didn't like the idea. This cove had been their home for the last several days. Sanji found it deeply insulting that there was no way to protect it from being taken by the Marines. Sanji closed his eyes. He knew what was coming, and he was ready to fight to the death if need be. He would hold this position for as long as he could. Both of his beloved women were running around the island looking for their screw-up of a captain. His Nami Swan and his sweet Robin were trying to find Luffy and bring him back before the Marines found him first. Somewhere in the back of his head, a tiny thought emerged that none of this was worth it. Luffy had already abandoned them. There was no reason that the girls should risk themselves for someone who didn't even want to be saved. Sanji violently shook his head and bit down on his cigarette so hard that it split in two. As soon as the thought appeared, he ferociously stomped it into the ground with the heel of his shoe. He would never abandon Luffy. Luffy had dragged him back onto his feet far too many times for Sanji to lose his faith in him now. Besides, Sanji said under his breath, Luffy would wait for me. I suppose that I can't give him any less. He glanced around to see if anyone was close enough to hear him. No one was. He sighed and turned his attention back to the coast. We are waiting for you, Captain. You better drag yourself out of this rut and get your ass back here. Don't you dare let us down, he said with a smile. He laughed at his own words. Luffy letting anyone down? The mere thought was absurd. Besides, Luffy had way too much to live for. Sanji's thoughts drifted to Luffy and Nami's relationship. That idiot. He has no idea how worried my Nami Swan is about him. She didn't even hesitate to run into the forest to find him. He doesn't deserve that kind of commitment. When he gets back here, I'm gonna. Sanji's rant was cut off by someone behind him laughing. Hold up there, brother, Frankie said as he walked up next to Sanji. There's no need to take all of your rage out on Luffy. Frankie laughed. Save most of your anger for the Marines. 'Cause I think there are going to be a lot of them. Sanji shook his head and pulled out another cigarette. Of course there's going to be a lot of them, you idiot, he said as he pulled out his lighter and lit the cigarette. We are in enemy territory. Sanji's voice drifted off as his sentence came to an end. Frankie knew the situation they faced. He didn't need Sanji telling him about it. Sanji put the cigarette in his mouth but didn't smoke it. He turned to face Frankie. Are we ready? He asked somberly. The smile on Frankie's face grew and he clamped his enormous hand on Sanji's shoulder. Of course we're ready, Frankie exclaimed proudly. Hell, we're super ready. He shouted, striking his signature pose. When those bastards get here, we'll kick their asses right out of the New World. Frankie proclaimed. After a moment of awkward silence, Frankie stepped out of his pose and continued. Not buying it, huh? Come on, brother. Have a little faith in someone besides Luffy. We got this. Just stick to the plan. Sanji smiled. Frankie's confidence was refreshing and he was right. They had a plan. As long as they stuck to it, they would be sailing away from the island with their entire crew in no time. Yeah, you're right, Sanji said, nodding. Of course I'm right, Frankie said, turning to walk away. You should calm down. Being on edge is only going to wear you out faster. You're going to need all of your strength for this fight. The girls will be fine, Frankie said as he walked away from Sanji. Sanji watched him walk over to the hatch that led to the lower deck. Frankie kicked it open and jumped into it, disappearing from Sanji's sight. Moron. How can I stop worrying about two beautiful, defenseless women? They are probably calling out to me right now, hoping I will come save them, Sanji shouted, raising his foot onto the railing in front of him. Frankie's voice drifted out of the open hatch. They're not, Frankie shouted. Sanji ignored him and scanned the coast. He didn't see anything yet. Sanji clenched his hands into fists. Damn it. I wish they would just hurry up and get back. As he spoke, something on the shore caught his attention. Brook stood on the shore waving his hands at Sanji. Sanji winced and glared at the skeleton in anger. What the hell are you doing, you moron? That's not hiding. You're supposed to be hiding, Sanji shouted. Brook laughed and shouted back. Yeah, I know, he shouted cheerfully. I just wanted to know if you had seen anything yet, Brook shouted. Sanji grinded his teeth together in anger as he felt his blood begin to boil. If I saw any Marines. Don't you think you would know it? Sanji screamed at the musician, his hair standing on edge. Brook laughed and spun in place. I guess that's true, he said laughing. Thank you, Sanji. Brook began walking towards the tree line again. As he neared the edge of the forest, Zoro jumped out of the forest with all of his blades drawn and landed next to Brook. I heard shouting. Are they here? He shouted looking down the beach. Sanji's mouth dropped open and his cigarette fell into the water. No, they aren't here, you dumbass. And what the hell are you doing over there? Sanji screamed, pointing his finger at Zoro. You're on the wrong side. Get back on your side of the beach, damn it. Zoro cocked his head at Sanji and sighed. He sheathed all of his swords and walked across the beach. Fine. But don't shout unless the Marines are here, Zoro said. You're the lookout. Do you job correctly? Sanji felt like his head was going to explode. He grabbed his face with his hand and took a few deep breaths. They had a plan, and it was already falling apart. The plan was to throw the Marines into chaos as soon as they appeared on the beach. The Marines would most likely line up along the tree line that stood behind the beach. Once they were all in position, they would march out in unison. If they did, the Straw Hats would be ready. Zoro and Brook were supposed to wait on opposite ends of the beach, and as soon as Sanji gave them the signal, they were supposed to charge through the Marine ranks, slashing as many Marines as possible while moving towards the center of the beach. That would cause panic in their ranks. At the same time, Chopper, Frankie, and Usopp, if he returned from the forest in time, would open fire on the Marines with the Sunny's cannons, causing widespread chaos and allowing Sanji the chance to join the squad on the beach. There, Sanji, Brook and Zoro would engage the Marines, causing as many casualties as possible. If they began to get overrun or Luffy returned to the cove, they would retreat to the Sunny and the crew would set sail. The Sunny would have its soldier dock system paddle wheels deployed and, as soon as everyone was aboard, the ship would paddle for open waters. After reaching the open sea, one good coup de burst would free the Straw Hats from their Marine pursuers. That was assuming that Luffy returned before the beach squad got overwhips arrived. If Luffy was not back in time, the crew would follow the same plan, except that the Sunny would sail around the perimeter of the island while they waited for him. The Marines would eventually figure out what they were doing and would take measures to stop them. At that point, the Straw Hat Pirates would have to abandon cardio entirely or risk losing the 1,000 Sunny. Hopefully the plan would give Luffy enough time to return to the Sunny. If not, they were ready. Now all that was left to do was wait for the Marines to show up, and Sanji didn't think they would be kept waiting very long. Nami ran in the direction that Robin had shown her as fast as legs could carry her. She ducked under branches and jumped over logs as she raced forward. Somewhere ahead of her was Luffy, about to do something impossibly stupid even for him. Nami didn't know what he was going to do, but she had a sickening feeling in the pit of her stomach. An ugly thought kept appearing in the back of her head, but she kept it pushed away. She would save Luffy, whether he liked it or not. Powers or no powers, he was going to lead them, and he was going to be the king of the pirates. That was a fact, and Luffy was going to accept it. As Nami surged forward, a Marine appeared in the trees in front of her. Almost as soon as he appeared, Nami jumped and kicked him in the face. "Get the hell out of my way," she shouted as her foot connected with the poor man's face. He fell backwards and landed on the ground with a loud thud. She landed a few feet in front of the bewildered man and, without breaking stride, continued running. She didn't care if he was alright or not. He shouldn't have gotten in her way. When Nami landed, a familiar weight bounced against her back. It was Luffy's hat, safe and sound on her back. "I'll have to make sure to give his hat back to him when we get back to the Sunny," she said as she kept running. Nami noticed that the forest was beginning to thin out. The trees were gradually getting further and further apart. This had to mean that she was getting closer to the entrance of the forest. It wouldn't be long now. Only a few more minutes and she would be able to find Luffy. Only a few more minutes and she would be in the middle of a navy base. Nami winced as she thought about the base. "Damn it," she said aloud. "How am I supposed to get him out of a navy prison? There's no way that I will be able to fight all of the Marines in the base." "I wish Usopp and Robin had came with me," she mumbled. She took a deep breath and tried to calm herself down a little. Panicking wasn't helping. She had to come up with a solid plan to reach the prison or wherever Luffy was being held. She wouldn't be helping anyone if she ended up getting caught too. Nami calmed her mind and she began thinking logically about the situation that was soon going to be presented to her. She began formulating her plan, but it didn't last long. All logical thinking flew out the window as the intimidating navy structure came into view. As she drew closer, she began to slow her pace. She was on a mission, but a navy base was still scary. Nami raised her hand to the wound on her shoulder from her earlier fall. "Ah crap," she said under her breath, "there it is." She let go of her arm and came to a complete stop a few yards from the wall of the base. She took a deep breath and thought about Luffy. "All right. This is for him," she said, her voice wavering a bit. "Damn it, I am going to charge him 4 million belly for this." She stood in place staring at the imposing structure for a few minutes. She tugged at the string that held Luffy's hat around her neck. It felt good to have a little part of him with her. It made her feel safe and it gave her the confidence to continue. Finally she took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "I'm coming, Luffy, just wait a little longer." With that, she jogged to the base of the wall and began looking for a way to get into the fortress. An army of heavily armed Marines, nearly 1,000 men in strength, marched through the woods. The Marines had never had the Straw Hat Pirates idle on one of their islands for this long before, and they weren't going to miss this opportunity. Over the last few days, Marines from all the surrounding islands had flooded to Cardio in order to join the attack against the infamous pirates. The Vice Admiral in charge of the soldiers stationed on Cardio decided that tactical planning was a waste of time. With an army of that size bearing down on them, the meager forces of the Straw Hats would crumble in no time, so complex strategy wasn't necessary. The Vice Admiral smiled as he watched his troops from the balcony of his office at the top of the tower in the middle of the Navy base. He had hoped to get a crack at the legendary Straw Hat Luffy himself, but his powers wouldn't be necessary with an army of this magnitude marching. He turned away from the balcony and walked back into his office. "Ah, I really screwed up this time," he said as he sat down in his chair. "If I had been the one to bring Straw Hat down, I would have been promoted to Admiral on the spot." He laughed as he leaned his chair back. He looked over his shoulder and his eyes came to rest on his weapon of choice, a staff with a 10-pointed star on the top, and a long straight blade as the base. The haft of the weapon was made of iron, so it made the staff a force to be reckoned with. Especially when he combined it with his devil fruit powers. "Oh well," he mumbled as he leaned his chair back down to his desk. "This is Straw Hat they're going after. He's a slippery son of a bitch. I might get my chance yet." He snickered and tapped his finger on his desk a few times. He waited a few seconds and did it again with a puzzled look on his face. I don't really feel like doing paperwork right now." He smiled and stood up. "I think I will go and meet the 2 strangers that have entered my base." He walked over to the door to his office and pulled a marine jacket with dark green cuffs off of the coat hanger. He slipped it on and walked out the door. A lone eye in the forest watched as hundreds of Marines unknowingly marched past it. Their army seemed to go on forever. The eye closed and disappeared. Robin blinked and turned to the assembled crew on the deck. Everyone was here except the Zoro, Brook, Luffy and Nami. The latter 2 wouldn't be joining them and the former 2 were ready to spring the trap as soon as Sanji gave them the signal. Robin thought about the plan that the guys had come up with. It was risky, and it isolated Zoro more than she would have liked, but she knew he could handle himself. It was a decent plan, but she was still worried. "They're getting close," she said. "They will be here very soon and there's a lot of them." Frankie and Sanji nodded while Usopp and Chopper whined in the background. "All right. I'll get the ranged unit into position," Frankie said. He turned to the 2 people cowering behind him. "Come on, boys," he said cheerfully. "Pull yourself together. We have over a half a dozen cannons to man. Let's show those snot-nosed Marines just how super the Straw Hat Pirates are." The 2 men didn't respond and continued to cower on the deck. Frankie scratched his head. "All right. If you 2 won't walk, I'll just have to carry you," he said, shrugging. He picked up Usopp and Chopper and headed for the cannon deck. Sanji watched them walk away and turned to face Robin. "So that's what they're doing. What about you?" he said. I don't want a woman of your beauty caught in the middle of this. Robin waved her hand at him. You don't have to worry about me, Sir Cook. I'll be fine, she said without looking at him. However, you should be getting ready for battle. I couldn't count all of the Marines I just saw. Sanji nodded and looked back at the coast. Yeah. A force of that size won't be able to fit onto this beach all at once. That's definitely going to play to our advantage. Sanji tapped his heel against the grass as the wind picked up. He closed his eyes and felt the cool evening air against his face. Robin nodded. I do have, she said, still not taking her eyes off the coast. Sanji grunted. What's up? He asked. What happens if the Marines use their ships to enter the cove? Do we have anything planned for that? Sanji laughed and pointed his thumb over his shoulder. Oh yeah. Don't you worry your gorgeous head about that. Usopp rigged something up when we first got here. He says that it will stop any ships from entering the cove. He seemed pretty sure of it, so I'm going to trust whatever he planted over there. Robin stayed silent as she thought about it. After a few moments Sanji spoke again. Yeah, I know, I'd be more comfortable knowing what he has planned too, but he said to leave it to him. Robin ran her hand through her hair. Okay. If Long Nose is confident in it, then I'll trust him, she said. Her eyes scanned the forest ahead of them. Suddenly she gasped. Wait, she said abruptly. She watched the tree line carefully and saw movement approaching the cove. They were here. She pointed forward and said nothing. Sanji nodded. All right. Showtime. He glanced over to the spot where Zoro was hiding. Sanji guessed that he knew they were there too and that he already had his swords drawn. Sanji glanced over to Brook. He was ready too. The defense of the Thousand Sunny was about to begin. Just as Sanji's eye returned to the center of the cove, the Marines emerged from the woods. Well, Nami sighed with a frown on her face. I wonder who did this. She sighed, looked around to see if there was anyone nearby. I can't believe this. If First was a Marine commander, I'd have people stationed here. This is ridiculous. She was standing in front of a large circular-shaped hole in the outer wall of the Navy base. Clearly, someone had broken into the base from the outside. And Nami had a pretty good idea who did it. Powers or no powers, she said, peeking in the hole. Luffy sure knows how to trash a place. Well, at least I have my way in. Nami hesitantly stepped forward and poked her head through the hole. She glanced around looking for any signs of people. No one yet. Nami thought, half annoyed and half relieved. She pulled her body through the hole and carefully lowered herself through to the ground. The second her feet touched the ground, she took cover behind a small building. Nami took a few deep breaths and slowly poked her head around the corner. In front of her lay what appeared to be the execution ground. A lone wooden pole stood in the middle of a dirt field. Seeing the pole made Nami feel uneasy, but she was relieved to see it was vacant. Luffy could have easily been tied to that pole. She looked around the field for any signs of life. Fortunately for her, there was no one. Growing more pissed by the moment, Nami stepped out from behind her building and stepped into the field, still searching for any Marines. There is a clear entrance into the heart of this base and no one is guarding it. She thought as she walked across the field passing the wooden pole. These Marines are incompetent as hell. There's no way that they would be able to take Zoro and the others. Nami's thoughts drifted to the Sunny and the battle that would soon be raging around it. Nami had complete faith in her crew members. But a vacant Marine base could only mean one thing. Every Marine on the island was marching on their little cove. That's seriously bad, Nami said aloud. There's no one here. They must be going after the Sunny. I have to find Luffy and get back as fast as I can. She broke into a jog as she crossed the execution ground. At the edge of the field stood several small buildings, one of which looked like an observation room for the execution grounds. Several yards behind the observation room, located in what Nami assumed was the center of the base, was a tall tower. That would be the command tower, she guessed. Nami turned her attention to the observation room. What could be in there? The building is not big enough to be of any strategic value. She looked inside of the opening and saw a chart on the back wall. There were 14 tally marks on the chart. Above the tallies was the word, executions, in red paint. Nami shivered. They're keeping a tally of how many people they executed here. That's a bit morbid. I wonder if… Nami stopped talking immediately when she heard the sound of someone walking and talking. It sounded like someone was about to walk out of the command tower. Nami bit her tongue and threw open the door of the observation room. She quickly jumped inside and locked the door. She didn't dare make a noise. She closed her eyes and listened. The person calmly walked out of the command tower and down the steps and onto the grass in front of it. Nami could make out the sound of 2 more people walking behind the first. Once all 3 people were out of the tower, Nami could clearly understand what they were saying. "Damn it. I can't believe we are stuck here while everyone else is off killing the Straw Hats," one of them said. "Yeah, this is bullshit," said another one. "But get over it. We have a job to do. Be grateful that the Vice Admiral is keeping us busy." "Where's that hole at?" a third voice answered. "I think the Vice Admiral said it was on the other side of the execution grounds. Behind the exterior holding cells. He said that it was huge. Someone really powerful punched straight through it." As they spoke, Nami could hear them passing the observation room. The first man spoke with a hint of shock in his voice. "For real? Who could have punched their way through a solid iron wall? That's impossible. Some devil fruit user had to have done it." Nami raised her hand and slowly drug it down her face. "That moron. Did he have to make it that obvious? Couldn't he have just found a door or something?" She shook her head and kept listening. At this point, the 3 men were too far away for her to make out what they were saying. She counted to 10 and slowly opened the door to the observation room. She inched her way out and looked in the direction where the Marines had been heading. She could see them heading directly for the building that she had been hiding behind before. As soon as the men disappeared from view, she dashed out of her hiding spot and ran for the command tower. They didn't say anything about capturing the legendary Straw Hat Luffy, so it is safe to assume that he isn't in any of the holding cells. She reasoned as she ran. Which means he is probably loose somewhere in the base. Nami came to a stop in front of stairs that led up to the command tower. Several large buildings in the center of the base surrounded the tower. She had no idea what any of the buildings were, and she really didn't have time to search through all of them. "Well, I guess I really don't have a choice but to search them all one by one, do I?" Nami said aloud as she took a step towards one of the buildings. The smell of food drifted out of it, so she assumed it was some kind of kitchen, dining room. "No, you really don't," a voice said behind her. Nami's froze mid-step and her eyes widened in surprise. Her mouth quivered as she realized that there was a man standing at the top of the stairs behind her. She turned around slowly and looked at the man over her shoulder. A man, which Nami guessed to be about 50, stood at the top of the stairs that led into the command tower. He was holding a staff with a star that had too many points on the top. She opened her mouth to scream, but the man raised the hand that was not holding the staff. "Don't do that. If you scream, the men that just left will come back. Then you will be in real trouble, young lady," he said calmly. Nami shook in pure terror. She was caught. This guy had to be a Marine. There was no other reason that he would be on a Marine base otherwise. He would capture her and throw her in the dungeon to be executed. The wind picked up and the man's jacket fluttered in the wind. Nami recognized it as an officer's jacket. That made things a lot worse. The man looked at her quizzically. "Well, I can see that you know that this was a bad idea. Trespassing on Navy property is a so that," the man said coldly. He waited for a few seconds, but Nami said nothing in return. She couldn't. She was too busy trying to figure out a way to escape. After a few moments, the man smiled and pointed towards the building that Nami had been heading into before. "He's in there. Go find him and leave before the soldiers come back." His words shocked Nami. "I'm sorry," Nami squeaked as she took a step away from the man. The man laughed. "I'm sure you are. And you should be. You kids need to find better hobbies than sneaking into restricted areas." He shook his head. "Frankly, I'm disappointed that a fine young woman of your age and beauty is sneaking into Navy bases for fun. You should have a job helping your parents pay their bills. Heck, you should be looking to buy a place of your own soon enough. I'm sure if you and your boyfriend start saving your money, between the two of you, you will be able to afford a place." The man seemed genuinely kind. Nami began to think that he wasn't going to arrest her. Suddenly his mood changed completely. "Now," the man said sternly, "get your boy toy and get out. I won't tell you again." Nami jumped back at his sudden aggressive tone. She was also extremely annoyed that he called Luffy her boy toy. "Boy toy?" she exclaimed. "Now hold on a sec. Her words froze in her throat as the man lifted his staff and pointed it directly at Nami's face. Her blood ran cold and she felt the color drain from her face. "Quiet," the man said. His voice was thick with authority. "Not another word. Get your asses out of my base, you have 10 minutes. He lifted his staff back and held it in his hand. 10 minutes? After that, I am coming after you myself." Nami gasped and turned around. She had heard enough. This guy meant business. She turned around and ran towards the building that he had pointed out for her. As she ran, she could hear him speaking. "Do not test my patience, child. I did not acquire my current position by showing mercy." Nami opened the door to the building, jumped inside and slammed the door, drowning out anything else he had to say. She stood inside the door for a moment trying to catch her breath. She felt her eyes stinging as she leaned back against the closed door. She was terrified. That man could have killed her and she wouldn't have been able to stop him. Nami slowly slid down the door and collapsed onto the floor. As her knees hit the floor, she heard a loud crash from deeper inside the building. She looked in the direction of the sound and realized that she had stumbled into a dining room. Her guess about the building's purpose had been correct. There were tables and chairs scattered around the room with 2 doors along the far wall. In between the 2 doors was a large window. Nami stood up and began walking forward. Her legs felt like jelly as she inched forward. As she came closer to the window, she noticed that it was a window into the kitchen. There was a lot of noise coming from the other side of the window. A smile spread across Nami's face when she realized that only one person could make that much noise when they ate. "Of course I'd find you in the kitchen, you jackass," Nami said. She felt a wave of relief flow over her as the sounds from the kitchen stopped and a voice echoed out of the room. "Nami?" Luffy asked with his usual stupid tone. Robin and Sanji stared at the army of Marines as they flooded out of the forest. The small cove was quickly filled with men and rifles, all pointing directly at the 2 people on the deck of the Sunny. Sanji watched as even more Marines stormed out of the forest. Their numbers were beyond counting. He took a long drag from his cigarette. "Well," he said to Robin under his breath without looking at her. "This might be more complicated than we thought. I know you saw a lot of them, but this is unreal." Robin nodded but said nothing. Sanji turned his head and looked at her. Her forehead was covered in sweat and he could see a glimmer of fear in her eyes. Sanji grinded his teeth in annoyance. He couldn't help her feel any better about their situation. How could he tell her it was going to be all right? Hell. He thought bitterly. "I'm starting to wonder if we will be able to get out of this one." Sanji sighed and turned his attention back to the coast. All of the Marines had taken up their positions. There were 3 visible rows of Marines, and most of them were aiming their weapons at the Sunny. The front row, closest to the water, was kneeling, the middle row was standing up straight, and the final row was hidden behind the middle row. Sanji guessed they were replacements for the other 2 rows if any of their men fell. If there was anyone else behind the 3rd row, Sanji couldn't see them. As Sanji surveyed their enemy, a single man came walking out of the forest. The Marines moved aside to let the man through. The man had a long dark beard that was laughably long. The beard completely covered his chest and stomach. That guy with the ridiculous beard must be in charge. Sanji thought, locking eyes with him. The man cleared his throat and shouted, "Straw Hat Pirates. This is your one and only warning, surrender, and we may take you in alive. Resist, and you will be executed where you stand." He shouted. His every word seemed to echo around the cove. Sanji closed his eyes again and took one long drag from his cigarette before stepping forward. "Cut the crap," he shouted back to the bearded man. "You and I both know that there won't be any surrendering here. This ship is our home, our turf. If you think your jug-headed Marines can beat us here, then you are stupider than your beard," Sanji shouted with a smile. He could see the bearded Marine become enraged, so he continued. "We aren't surrendering. In fact, I was just about to get dinner started," Sanji called happily. "Would any of you like to come aboard and join us?" The Marines began mumbling and looked at one another with confused looks for a few seconds before the bearded man shouted at them. "Knock it off. No one is having dinner with pirates," Sanji laughed. "Ah, that's too bad. I think you would have loved our main dish too. We were having bearded wolf," he said with a smirk. The Marines looked around again in confusion, and before the bearded man could regain control of his troops, Sanji shouted. Usopp! Now! A green pellet shot out from one of the cannon ports on the side of the Sunny. As the pellet flew through the air, Usopp shouted. Green Star! Impact Wolf! The green pellet exploded into the shape of a large wolf made of grass. The grass wolf flew straight at the face of the bearded man. His eyes grew wide as the wolf flew closer, but there was no time to react. The wolf's nose slammed into the man's face, releasing a massive shockwave that knocked Marines away from the impact location. The beard man flew backwards into the forest, coughing up blood as he flew. Upon seeing their leader defeated so quickly, the Marines panicked for just a moment. But that was all the time Frankie needed. Fire! Frankie shouted from inside the ship. On his order, all 7 cannons on the side of the ship facing the beach opened fire. Cannonballs screamed through the air, slamming into the soft sand. Upon impact, the explosions sent Marines flying in all directions. The cannons were quickly reloaded and fired again and again, scattering the Marines. The Marines left standing tried to run and escape back into the forest, but they were so tightly packed together, it made moving nearly impossible. The cannons decimated their ranks. It was complete chaos on the coast. Sanji had no idea how Frankie was firing and then reloading all 7 cannons so quickly, but he didn't care. He did his job. He gave them an opening. Sanji watched as Zoro and Brook began their attack. The 2 swordsmen charged from opposite ends of the beach, slashing and cutting all the Marines who stood before them. Zoro's eyes were obstructed by his green bandana, but Sanji could see the demonic fire that burned in them. Brook seemed to dance and bounce from Marine to Marine as he ran down the Ikali. As scared as Brook had been about his post, he seemed to be enjoying himself. Now it was time for Sanji to make his move. Sanji took his cigarette out of his mouth and tossed it into the water. He had had enough of standing around watching others fight. He bent his left knee and ignited his leg. Diable Hambi, he growled under his breath. He bent his knees and pushed forward, hurtling himself towards the beach. As he flew he saw strange plants and bamboo shooting up from the sand on the beach. Clearly Usopp was having a blast. As he reached the beach, he used his skywalk to propel himself up into the sky. He sailed above the Marines' heads and waited until he was a few feet above them before attacking. Poele Afrire! Spectre! He shouted as he sent flaming kicks down onto the Marines on the beach. Marines were knocked in all directions and several caught on fire. As they screamed and ran, they slammed into their fellow Marines, setting even more men on fire. The beach quickly became a mess of fire and explosions. Sanji landed on the beach and began attacking the panicking Marines. After a few moments, he realized that Zoro was fighting alongside him, cutting down Marines left and right. He didn't see Brook, but there was an icy chill in the air and ice crawled through the sand, so Brook was somewhere nearby. Amidst the chaos, Sanji noticed several Marines with extra arms sprouting out of them, and extra legs popping out of the ground. The entire crew was fighting. The battle raged on as the Sunny's cannons continued firing, scattering any groups of Marines that were starting to reform their ranks. Sanji smiled as he kicked down several Marines, knocking them into one of Zoro's attacks. This is going well, but the tide will turn soon. Hurry my sweet, we cannot keep this up forever. He thought grimly as he knocked half-dozen Marines into the forest. Nami stood staring at Luffy in disbelief. He was nonchalantly raiding the Marine's fridge. Piles of plates and discarded bones littered the floor around the doors of opened fridge. Luffy stood in the opened doors facing the window where Nami was standing. He smiled at her and waved, but she was too stunned to respond. She had found him. Nami had found Luffy. Eating. Not about to be executed. Not sitting in a prison cell surrounded by guards. Not injured in the slightest. He was in the kitchen just raiding the Navy base's fridge. After a few seconds Nami's hands slowly clenched into fists. Luffy's stupid grin did little to calm her gradually building rage. Luffy turned and pointed to the opened fridge. Nami, you're here too? This place is awesome. Look at the fridge. It's freaking huge. I wish the Sunny had a fridge this big. We would never run out of meat. He exclaimed happily. Luffy turned back to Nami and his expression changed from a happy smile to a serious frown. Now that I think about it, why are you here? This place isn't safe. You should be on the Sunny with the others. he said seriously before taking a large bite out of the chunk of meat he had in his hand and swallowing it. Nami's face twitched. "Why am I here?" she asked calmly. Nami could feel her blood boiling. She was about to explode. She raised one of her fists. "Why am I here inside this terrifying marine base? Why the hell do you think I'm here, you dumbass?" she screamed at him. Luffy was so shocked by her scream that he dropped his meat on the floor. "I'm here risking my life to stop you from being executed." Luffy folded his arms and cocked his head off to the side. "Me? Executed?" Luffy laughed. "Nami, you're funny. I'm not being executed," he said, giggling. Steam came bursting out of Nami's ears and her face turned red with anger. "Yeah, I can see that, you moron," she screamed at the top of her lungs. Tears rolled down her face, but she wasn't sure if they were tears of anger or joy. "We thought you had turned yourself in. I came to rescue you. If you aren't being executed, why the hell are you in the Navy base?" Luffy laughed again. Nami growled at his laughter, so he quickly stopped. "Turned myself in? That's funny, Nami. I didn't come to turn myself in. I came to—" His words were cut off by the doors of the dining room being kicked in. Nami turned around and gasped as the 3 Marines that she had seen earlier appeared in the doorway. All 3 were armed with rifles and all 3 were aimed right at Nami. "Intruders in the compound," one of them shouted as another closed and locked the doors. "The intruders have been identified as Straw Hat Luffy and Cat Burglar Nami." Another said, "Under order of Fleet Admiral Akainu, you are both under arrest and will be executed immediately." Nami gasped and stepped back towards the window to the kitchen. Her eyes grew wide as all 3 men aimed their rifles at her. "Fire!" the Marine shouted. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Nami heard someone shouting behind her, but she couldn't make out the words. She could only stare in horror as the 3 men pulled the triggers. Their action was instantly followed by a loud blast that seemed to echo around the inside of the building. "I'm going to die," Nami thought in horror as dust and debris flew through the air around her. She watched mortified as the 3 bullets quickly closed the gap between her and the Marines. There was no way they could miss. She was dead. Her journey had come to an end, and that sacred her more than simply dying ever would. She couldn't run, she couldn't scream, she couldn't even move. She could only watch as Luffy miraculously appeared in front of her. Steam rolled off of his reddened skin as he appeared between her and the bullets. Luffy was going to take the bullets for Nami. Nami had a flashback to the battle on the Sunny before they reached the island. Luffy had taken a bullet for her then, and it was nearly the death of him. The difference was that he had his powers then. Now he was just a regular person. There was no way that he would survive this time. Time came to a complete stop as the bullets slammed into Luffy's chest. Nami could do nothing but watch in horror and scream. "Luffy!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. Nami, the seconds ticked by as Nami waited for Luffy's dead body to fall backwards, but nothing happened. She looked up at him and gasped. The bullet had hit Luffy's skin and had pushed his rubber skin back behind him. Nami's eyes filled with tears as the realization dawned on her. Luffy had his devil fruit powers back. "Hey, I'm rubber again," Luffy said happily. His attention quickly shifted to the 3 mortified Marines at the other end of the hall. "You bastards!" Luffy screamed as the bullets were forced out of Luffy's skin and thrown back towards the Marines. All 3 bullets missed and peppered the doorway around the Marines. The 3 men just stood there staring at the man who had not only stopped their bullets, but who had thrown them back towards the shooters. They were screwed and they knew it. "You bastards!" Luffy repeated. "How dare you try and hurt Nami? How dare you try to hurt my girlfriend?" Luffy charged forward, throwing his fists forward again and again. Each punch landed a blow on one of the 3 Marines and slammed them backwards into the closed doors of the dining room. Before they could react to the first blows, they were trapped in a storm of fists. "How dare you try to hurt my queen? No one will ever hurt her. You hear me?" he screamed as he pulled both of his fists back at the same time. "Now, Gum Gum Jet Bazooka!" he screamed as he threw both of his fists forward at the same time. His fists slammed into the dazed Marines. The impact of the attack blew out the wall that they had been standing in front of. The Marines were sent flying out of the building and across the courtyard. They slammed into the base of the command tower and broke straight through the wall into the tower itself. As the red of his skin faded away, Luffy shouted one last time. I will always protect you, Nami, I promise. Tears streamed down Nami's face as she watched her love beat the hell out of the men who were about to kill her. Luffy had his powers back, she couldn't believe it. It seemed almost too good to be true. She glanced behind her and saw that the wall that had once separated the kitchen from the dining area had been destroyed. That explains the dust and debris that I saw before the Marines shot, Nami realized. Nami opened her mouth to say something, but before she could say a word, Luffy stretched his arm out and wrapped it around her. He pulled her to him and his lips met hers in a deep, but brief, kiss. Luffy quickly broke it off. I'm sorry that I worried you, he said quickly. He scooped up Nami and put her on his back. But we need to get out of here now, he said as he ran for the hole in the building. Luffy ran as fast as he could out of the ruined build and ran straight for the execution grounds. I know secret way to get out of here, he said as he ran across the field. Nami was surprised that Luffy was still able to run as fast as he was with Nami on his back. As they approached the building that blocked the hole in the wall, Nami realized that Luffy was about to run into the building. Luffy, you're going to run into that building, Nami shouted. Luffy smiled. Nah, I got this. I'm rubber again, remember? He asked confidently. He jumped into the air and swung his left foot out beside him. He swung his leg around in front of him, demolishing the building as if it was made of paper. The building broke into shards as Luffy landed on the ground a few feet away from where he had jumped. He began running forward again, but the Marines had repaired the hole that he had made in the wall. Luffy, Nami shouted nervously. Don't worry, Nami, he shouted back. He jumped into the air again and threw his right foot backwards. His foot turned a deep black before he shot his foot directly out in front of him, demolishing a large section of the Navy's undamaged wall. Nami cheered the falling debris and escaped into the open forest. The pair moved as fast as Luffy could carry them as he charged forward. All right, Nami, let's get back to the Sunny, Luffy shouted happily. Yeah, Nami cheered back. She thought about the battle waging back at the Sunny. The others had to be getting tired. Luffy, we need to hurry. The Marines are attacking the Sunny right now. The others are fighting them, but I don't know how long they will last, Nami said. Her voice was thick with fear and worry. Luffy's smile grew and spread across his face. Sounds like a good fight. I can't wait to join in, he said. His words were rewarded with a swift smack from his passenger and the pair giggled. Alright, I know. Let's get back to the Sunny and get the hell out off this island, he shouted as he pushed his legs to move faster. Nami smiled and buried her face into the back of Luffy's neck. Good. We can finally leave together, she mumbled happily. After a few seconds, Nami opened her eyes and looked around. They were going in the wrong direction. Wait, Luffy. No, not this way. You're going the wrong way. Turn, she shouted. Luffy laughed. Oops, sorry. He laughed as he adjusted his course and ran in a different direction. Better? He asked his bossy passenger. Better, Nami said as she pushed her head over Luffy's shoulder and kissed him on the cheek. Sanji knocked the sword of an attacking marine out of its owner's hand and into the air with the sole of his foot. With another swift kick, Sanji knocked his attacker over the heads of his fellows and into the forest. Sanji took a quick moment to survey the battlefield. The battle at the Sunny had gone downhill very quickly. If the Sunny's cannons had continued firing, the Straw Hats could have crushed the overwhelming force of attackers. However, Marines had gotten aboard the Sunny and had forced Robin below decks with Frankie and the others. They were now fighting below deck, trying to push the enemy back off the ship. While Frankie and the others fought for control of the ship, the cannons that had been keeping the Marines scattered and disoriented had been silenced. Taking full advantage of the silence, the Marines quickly reformed their ranks and were steadily overwhelming Sanji, Zoro and Brook. Most of the riflemen had been taken out, but there were still hundreds of swordsmen ready to engage the pirates in close combat. The trio had been forced into a tight circle and were now fighting back to back, trying to dodge bullets and keep the swords at bay. Get the hell out of my way, you bastards, Sanji screamed as he lashed out with a swift kick. His attack knocked several Marines away, but even more were right behind them ready to take their place. Move, damn it. I don't have time for this. My sweet Robin needs me. Sanji was desperately trying to break the circle of Marines long enough for him to skywalk to the Sunny, but the constant flow of the battle had made it impossible to escape. There were just too many Marines. Sanji didn't care about anyone on the beach, but he was terrified about what was going on inside the Sunny. He had to find a way to get there. Suddenly an elbow smacked Sanji in the back. "Hey Cook!" Zoro shouted over the roar of the battle. "If I make you an opening, can you get to the Sunny?" Zoro asked. He was blocking the blades of several Marines at once. He was holding them back like they were children, but even he was slowly being pushed back. Sanji knew that if he and Zoro were struggling, Brook must have been on the verge of panic. "I need an answer now, damn it. Can you get to the Sunny and save Robin?" Sanji smiled. He and Mosshead were on the same page for once. "Yeah, I can do it. I just need a few seconds without a sword swinging at my face," Sanji shouted back. Zoro smiled. "Alright pretty boy. Duck, because you're about to get your chance." Sanji jumped back and kneeled down behind Zoro. Zoro quickly forced the Marines he had been blocking away and took a step back. "Three swords style. Black rope dragon twister." He shouted and swung his blades in a large circle. Zoro's swing caused a massive twister of blades to form above him. Dozens of Marines were swept up in the twister and ever more were thrown to the ground by the force created by the attack. Zoro only allowed the attack to last for a few seconds and then allowed it to fade. The attack caused a brief respite in the battle, but that was all that Sanji needed. Sanji leapt into the air. "Hey thanks Mosshead. Don't worry, I'll save Robin for you since you aren't strong enough to do it yourself," he shouted down to Zoro. As Sanji glanced down to see Zoro's reaction, he realized that Brook was gone. "Shit, where did Brook go?" Sanji thought as he quickly scanned the beach. There was no sign of Brook on the crabbed beach. He would have to worry about that later. Sanji used his sky walk and flew towards the Sunny. As he flew over the water, Sanji noticed that the water in the cove had turned a deep red color. He also saw that even more Marines had broken away from the battle and were heading for the ship. This meant things were getting worse by the minute. As Sanji drew closer to the Sunny, he heard a familiar laugh below him. He looked down and saw Brook running across the water, his sword in hand. Brook was running towards the group of Marines that were swimming towards the Sunny. Brook laughed as he drew closer to them and began stabbing at the men in the water. Every stab connected with one of the Marines and stopped them from reaching the Sunny. "I get it," Sanji thought as he landed on the deck and sprinted to the lower decks. Brook broke off from the battle to stop the Marines from overwhelming the Sunny. The problem is, now that idiot is alone on the beach with no one to back him up. Maybe he will killed by the Marines and I can sweep Robin off her feet to heal her broken heart, Sanji thought with a fiendish smile on his face. Sanji burst onto the cannon deck and saw the deck swarming with Marines. Frankie and Chopper were holding the Marines back, while Robin and Usopp attacked them from range. They probably would have been all right, but Sanji refused to put Robin in unnecessary risk. "Hey, get away from her you bastards," Sanji shouted as he jumped into the room and began attacking Marines. Within seconds he had taken out every single Marine that had invaded the Sunny. Sanji ran over to Robin before the last of the Marines fell to the floor. "Robin darling, are you all right? Those barbarians didn't hurt you, did they?" he asked as he grabbed her hand. His eyes quickly searched her body for any signs of blood. While he was checking her, his eyes lingered in a few places a bit longer than they should have. Usopp stood up and shook his head. "Yeah, never mind the rest of us, Sanji. Don't worry about us or anything. It's not like we were in any danger," Usopp snapped. The Sunny's cannons roared back to life as Frankie began firing them again. "Okay," Sanji said calmly without looking at him. "I won't." Usopp was about to yell again but Chopper cut him off. "Sanji, you came to save us," Chopper squealed as he jumped through the air and latched onto Sanji's leg. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," Chopper said, rubbing his face into Sanji's leg. Usopp grumbled and then shook his head. "Never mind, we don't have time for this. We need to get Zoro and Brook and get out of here right now," Usopp said in a panic. He ran for the door but Sanji grabbed his arm as he ran past. Whoa, Nami isn't back yet and we aren't going anywhere as until she is," Sanji snapped, trying to shake Chopper off of his leg. Usopp knocked his hand away and turned to face him. "We can't stay here any longer. The Navy has battleships sailing around the island right now. If we don't get the Sunny out of this cove we are going to be trapped like rats," he said. Robin stepped forward. "He's right. We have lost the cove. We won't be able to save anyone if we remain here any longer," she said. Sanji couldn't say no to Robin. He clenched his fist and sighed. Robin frowned and continued. "Nami isn't stupid. She will head for coast before she goes to the cove," Robin said assuredly. Sanji took a deep breath and sighed again. "Fine. Let's go. I guess we have no choice," he said. He hated the whole idea of this. He felt like he was betraying both Nami and Luffy, but Robin was right. At this rate, they would all be dead or captured by the time they got back. The Sunny had to move now. Sanji, Robin and Chopper ran up onto deck and joined Usopp, who was already up here sniping at the Marines. Brook had climbed up the ship as well and was standing next to Usopp watching the battle. Usopp saw them running onto the deck and quickly waved them over. "Hey, things are getting dicey on the beach. We need to get Zoro out of there," he said as he sniped another Marine. Robin stepped up. "Well, allow me," she said with a smile. She crossed her arms focused on the beach. Two enormous arms erupted out of the sand next to Zoro. They began pushing Marines away from the overwhelmed swordsman. Once the Marines were far enough away from Zoro, one of the hands quickly scooped Zoro up and tossed him towards the ship. The swordsman crashed into the grassy deck of the ship as the massive arms disappeared. He quickly jumped up and pointed a finger at Robin. "What the hell?" he shouted. "Why did you pick me up and toss me like a freaking toy?" Robin smiled and walked over to him. She kissed him on the cheek and walked past him. "Because I wanted to," she said. Zoro half smiled and sheathed his swords. He looked over to Sanji. "Oh look, the cook was actually useful for once." He looked back to the beach. "I guess this means we are abandoning the cove?" Sanji nodded as Frankie ran up onto deck. Frankie ran over to the helm and began turning the ship. The Sunny's soldier dock system had been set to channel 0, so the paddle wheels were already out. The wheels began spinning and the ship turned towards the exit of the cove. "Yeah. I hate it as much as you do, but we can't stay. We are going to pick up Luffy and Nami up somewhere else. Oh, and we have a bunch of Marines below deck that need kicked off the ship. Take care of that for me, would you?" Sanji asked as he took one of his cigarettes out and lit it. Zoro glared at Sanji and walked past him. "Fine. But there is one thing you should know," Zoro said seriously. Sanji turned and looked at him, but Zoro didn't turn to face Sanji. "If things get bad and the Sunny has to leave the island to stay safe, I am not going with it," he said bluntly. Sanji chuckled and turned away. "We should make today a holiday, Mosshead. This is the one and only time the two of us have ever agreed on two things in one day." He walked towards the helm of the ship and looked towards the open sea. "Shit," Sanji said aloud. Over the tops of the trees Sanji could make out the masts of battleships. They were right outside the cove and one was about to come in. They would be able to open fire any second. "Hey Frankie, move it, we need to get out of this cove before those battleships start firing," he shouted. Frankie laughed and waved his hand at Sanji. "Chill bro. Our super sniper has a surprise for those ships. Watch." He pointed towards the opening that the ships were coming through. As the battleships came through, the hulls of the ship caught several vines that Usopp had rigged up across the opening. Usopp snickered. "They have fallen right into my trap. This won't sink the ship, but it should effectively clog that opening." Just as Usopp finished his sentence, the battleship exploded into a massive red cloud of smoke shaped like a skull. The iron hull of the ship was undamaged, but the masts were destroyed and the Marines on board were thrown in all directions. Usopp smiled and gave Frankie a thumbs up. "Green star. Skullbomb grass," he said with a smirk. "That's what they get for messing with Captain Usopp." Frankie laughed. Sanji nodded, watching the chaos that Usopp had wrought. "Impressive work there, Captain," Sanji said half sarcastically. "Any chance that you set up 3 more of those?" Usopp's smile faded and he turned to Sanji. "Are you nuts? Do you have an idea how many bomb grass I had to use over there? I used my entire stash in that one spot. I won't have any more for a few weeks at least," Usopp said, pointing at his satchel. Sanji groaned and turned his attention back to the other battleships. "Whatever. One down is better than nothing," he said as the Sunny moved out of the cove. For the first time in over a week, the Sunny moved out of the cove and back into open waters. The crew watched as the cove that they had called home for the past week vanished from sight. The Sunny sailed away from the cove and began its trek around the island. Frankie figured that the Sunny would be able to make 2 full laps around the island before the Marines caught onto their plan. There wasn't a lot of time left. The Sunny had to be kept safe or none of them would have a way out. Luffy and Nami had to hurry. It was all up to the 2 of them now. "Hurry, Luffy. We need to get to the cove," Nami said as the pair dashed through the forest. Nami was still riding on Luffy's back and she had no intention of getting off until they were safely sailing away on their ship. "Who knows," Nami thought with a smile. "Maybe I'll stay up here even longer than that." Nami shook her head. Now wasn't the time to get distracted. They weren't safe yet. Luffy laughed. "I gotcha, Nami. Straight to the cove and into the battle," he said in a joyful tone. A few seconds after the words left his mouth, a cold chill went down Nami's spine. She lifted her arm and grabbed a handful of Luffy's hair. She squeezed it as hard as she could. "No, Luffy, stop, stop, stop," she shouted as Luffy came to a grinding halt. His sandals skidded across the ground as he tried to stop. "Ow, ow, ow. Nami, let go, that hurts," he shouted. Nami quickly let go of his hair. "Sorry," she said half-heartedly. "If it hurt that badly, maybe your powers aren't entirely back yet. But never mind that. We aren't going to the cove," she said. Luffy looked at her with a confused look. "We aren't, okay," he said as a smile spread across his face. "Where to?" Nami put her finger to her chin and started thinking. Assuming that they are still in the cove, that entire place would be crawling with Marines. "I don't want to wade through an army of Marines, especially if Luffy's powers aren't fully back," she thought. She was so deep in thought that she didn't notice the 3 Marines walking through the woods. Luffy kicked all 3 of them away while trying not to disturb the navigator on his back. Besides, it doesn't matter how strong the others are. They wouldn't be stupid enough to endanger the Sunny. It has been a while since Robin and Usopp ran back to the Sunny. If I had to guess, I'd say that they have abandoned the cove and are now sailing along the coast. But how do we catch them while they are sailing around the island? She snapped her fingers as a smile spread across her face. If they are circling the island, then we would be able to catch up with them by heading the opposite direction. Nami looked around. "Perfect. I know just what to do. Luffy, head that way," she said as she pointed Luffy in the right direction. "We are going to run to the edge of the island and then run along the coast until we reach the others." Without a second thought, Luffy nodded and started running again. As Luffy started running, Nami noticed the Marines lying on the ground around where they were standing. She was sure they weren't there when they stopped. "Hey Luffy," she asked quietly. "What's up, Nami?" he responded. "Were those Marines on the ground back there?" she asked. "Yep," he answered. "Oh, where did they come from?" she asked. He looked over his shoulder and smiled. "They came out of the forest while you were thinking. I kicked their asses so they would bug you," he said happily. "Oh." Nami closed her eyes and smiled. She leaned forward and kissed his cheek. "Thanks," she said quietly. Luffy's smile grew larger. "You're welcome," he said. Nami leaned her head again that he didn't have his hat on. It was still on her back. "Oh hey Luffy, I have your hat," she said. "Do you want it back?" Luffy shook his head. "Nah, you keep it for now. I know you will keep it safe. I trust you, Nami," he said plainly. Nami felt her cheeks grow warm and she realized that she was blushing a bit. Even now she was amazed that Luffy would trust her with his hat. Suddenly a loud bang echoed through the forest. The loud noise made Nami cry out and she closed her eyes. "There he is. It's Straw Hat Luffy. Open fire," a voice shouted. A barrage of gunfire instantly followed the shout. Nami screamed as bullets flew past her. Nami realized that they were nearly surrounded by Marines. She hadn't expected the Marines to be this deep in the forest. She figured that they all would have been at the cove. Now that she thought about it, Nami had no idea how close they were to the cove. "They're getting away. After them. Don't let the pirates escape," someone else screamed as Luffy kept running. Nami tried to make herself as small as she could. She trusted Luffy to protect her, but she still didn't like the idea of being shot. After a few moments had passed, Nami realized that the gunfire had stopped. She opened her eyes and looked around. To her left was nothing but trees and green plants. Luckily, she couldn't hear the Marines at all. What she could hear was the ocean. Nami loved the sound of the ocean lapping against the beach. It was a sound that she never got tired of. Maybe it was because she has spent so long sailing with her friends and listening to the sounds of the ocean. When she couldn't hear the sounds of the sea, she felt like something inside her was missing. It was good to hear the sounds of the sea again. Wait, she thought suddenly. The sea? I hear the sea? She turned her head to her right and was met with a dark expanse of open ocean. The sun had nearly set, so she couldn't see too well, but that was definitely the ocean. We are on the coast, Nami said in disbelief. Luffy? We are at the coast, she mumbled. Luffy laughed. Well yeah. You said to run to the sea and you pointed. I followed your finger and here we are, he shrugged. He kept running the right way even while they were shooting at us? He never altered his course. Nami looked at Luffy and smiled. Of course he didn't, he's following my instructions to the letter. He trusts me to get him back to his ship, she thought happily. Well then, I'd better not screw this up. Nami scanned the water in front of them looking for the lights of the sunny. They should stick out like a sore thumb against the inky blackness of night, but all she saw was water. She had an idea of how big the island was, but without knowing exactly where the others were, she had no way of guessing how long it would take for them to find them. I don't see anything, Nami. Luffy said. Yeah, I noticed. She snapped. Keep going. This is a big island and if you keep running we will run across them sooner or later. Just keep following the coast. Luffy nodded and started running again. Luffy kept his pace but Nami noticed that he kept glancing to the left and looking at something through the trees. He was doing it every few seconds and she was beginning to get worried. Hey, why do you keep looking into the forest like that? Nami asked. There are Marines nearby. I can feel it, he said seriously. I don't know if they know where we are but they're coming. His serious tone made Nami rather nervous. Nami was about to say something else when Luffy suddenly jumped into the air. Nami's arms tightened around him as he jumped. She looked down and saw Marines emerging from the forest. She could hear them shouting. Well, they are here, Luffy said as he landed. Upon hitting the ground Luffy came grinding to a halt. And they have us surrounded, he said grimly. What? Nami exclaimed. She looked at the area where they had stopped. It was a large clearing at the edge of the forest. The trees and plants were pushed back about 30 feet or so away from the shoreline and formed a half-circle clearing. That half-circle clearing was crawling with Marines. Lanterns and fires had been set up all over the clearing, making it very easy to see the entire clearing. Nami gasped and looked towards the path that they had been following along the shore. It too was blocked by Marines. Luffy is right. They were surrounded, and every single Marine was armed and ready to cut them down. Nami ducked her head down behind Luffy but he didn't put her down. As she cowered, Luffy began to chuckle. Well, you caught up with me. Not bad, Luffy said in the serious mocking tone that he always took when fighting Marines. But just because you caught up with me doesn't mean you have beaten me. Bring it on, I'll kick all of your asses right now, he shouted. One of the Marines laughed and spoke up. Yeah, you probably will. But that won't stop us from shooting at you, Straw Hat. Half of our men are carrying dart rifles made just for you. Even if we don't hit you, your companion there might not be as lucky. Luffy growled and stared at the Marine that had spoken. Nami knew he was right. Luffy would be fine fighting all of these Marines, but with Nami on his back, he would be burdened with having to make sure that she was never in danger while he was fighting. On the other hand, if he put her down, the Marines could just shoot her where she stood. They were in serious trouble. Luffy, Nami said quietly. The Marine that spoke up earlier spoke again. Just give it up. We have you cornered. There's no escape and you both know it, the Marine said in a mocking voice. Nami started shaking but stopped as Luffy chuckled again. You know, he said in a relaxed tone. I have seriously messed up today. I made my queen cry and I scared her when I ran off. She came all the way to your base in order to find me. She has been through so much because of me today, and I love her too much to put her through any more. I will not fight you. If I did, she would get hurt or worse. I will not risk her life anymore, so I won't fight you. Nami's mouth dropped open in shock. Luffy, you can't just give, Nami began. Luffy looked over his shoulder and smiled at her. His smile stopped her words in her throat. Don't worry, Nami. I won't put you in any more danger. Please don't be scared, he said in a sweet tone. I love you, Nami. Nami felt her eyes stinging with tears. She noticed that the Marines were preparing to fire their rifles. She ignored them and looked into Luffy's eyes. Luffy, I love you T. Nami was cut off by a series of loud thuds. She looked towards the source of the sound. Scattered around the clearing were what looked like 4 green rocks. They were very easy to see in the middle of the bright field. What the hell are those? One of the Marines asked. Nothing, forget them. Kill the pirates, the first Marine shouted. All of the Marines aimed their rifles and prepared to fire. Right as they were about to pull the trigger, someone began screaming. Green Star. Devils, Usopp screamed as the 4 rocks exploded into huge Venus flytraps. The plants immediately began attacking the Marines. Men screamed and ran in all directions trying to escape from the massive plants. As the Marines ran, the ground beneath their feet exploded and giant arms burst from the ground. The hands joined the plants in their attack on the Marines. Nami looked on in shock, unable to comprehend what was going on. A smile formed on her face and it slowly grew as the realization dawned on her. Tears of joy began rolling down her face. She was just about to start crying when Luffy turned and ran past one of the plants. He ran straight for the water. Right before his foot hit the water, Luffy jumped into the air, hurtling himself towards the Sunny. All of the Sunny's lights were on, making the ship glow like a beacon of salvation in the blackness of night. Chills ran through Nami's body as the Sunny drew closer and closer. Luffy pulled one of his arms out from under Nami and stretched it toward the ship. He grabbed them both onto the grassy deck of their ship. Luffy let go before the pair hit the grass and they both rolled across the lawn. Nami opened her eyes and saw their entire crew standing on the lawn with smiles on their faces. Luffy stood up and helped Nami to her feet. He didn't take long to issue his first command to his crew. Frankie, get us out of here, he shouted. You got it, Captain, Frankie shouted back. Coup de burst. Frankie shouted and the Sunny rocketed out of the water and flew through the night. The 1000th Sunny flew through the air, carrying her cheering crew faster than the Navy could ever hope to go. The Straw Hat Pirates had escaped the Navy into darkness of night. A single figure watched as the pirate ship exploded out of the water and flew into the air. A smile spread across his lips as he watched the ship fly. The pirates had escaped. A young officer came running up to the figure. Vice Admiral, sir. The Marine saluted. I am terribly sorry, sir. But the pirates have escaped our grasp. We were outmaneuvered and unable to capture them, the Marine said as he cringed away from the Vice Admiral. That's fine, the Vice Admiral said calmly. The Marine looked at him with a confused look. It's fine, sir? The Marine asked. The Vice Admiral laughed. Yes, it's fine. Don't worry about it, lad. Just because they escaped, does not mean that they are safe. The Vice Admiral said with an evil chuckle. Have all of the men returned to the base. Tend to the wounded. I will take a few squads and pursue the pirates myself. The Marine saluted. Right away, sir, and good luck, the Marine said as he turned and ran into the forest. The Vice Admiral watched the sky in the direction that the ship had flown. Luck? I don't need luck. I have the power of the memory fruit. With its power, I can crush Straw Hat Luffy and his little friends. Just you wait, boy. Your time of reckoning is soon at hand. You will regret the day that you crossed paths with Vice Admiral Omoide. The sea was shrouded in the veil of night with the only constant source of light coming from the moon high in the sky. The sea was calm and the sky was perfectly clear. It was a night of peace and tranquility, especially for the Straw Hat Pirates. Only a few hours ago, the entire crew had been fighting for their lives against an overwhelming army of Marines. Now, they were sailing through the night, looking for a safe place to rest their weary heads. Everyone on the crew was exhausted, but they knew that the Marines were persistent and the ships that they had evaded on Cardio would already be searching for them. They could not rest until they were sure that they were safe from harm. The crew took up positions around the Sunny to keep an eye out for approaching ships. The ship was in complete silence save for the occasional navigation order given out by Nami. There were so many questions that needed answers and everyone was dying to get them, but the crew had been sailing together long enough to know that safety had to come first. After what seemed like an eternity, Zoro, who had taken his place in the crow's nest, finally made an announcement over the intercom. All right everyone, his voice reaching every crew member's ear. I haven't seen any sign of Marines in a while. I think it's safe for us to relax. His voice was heavy with relief as he spoke. Every person on the crew gave out a long and happy sigh. They were safe. However, their moment of peace didn't last very long. Now then, Zoro said. After he spoke, the hatch to the crow's nest opened and Zoro came climbing down. Everyone was gathering together on deck, and the same question was on all of their minds. It was Usopp that gave that question life. "Luffy," he said quietly, "what the hell were you doing?" He snapped, stabbing his finger at Luffy, who was standing in the center of the grassy lawn. "I don't know what the hell you were thinking, but you almost got all of us killed. Do you realize that?" Usopp was beginning to shout. Luffy stood facing Usopp, letting every word sink into him without saying a word in his defense. "You can't just go around making boneheaded decisions like that. You turned yourself in? That ridiculous." Usopp had made his point and everyone knew it, but they were all angry. Usopp was right. Luffy's stupid decision to go to the Navy base nearly cost them everything that they had worked for. However, he was taking it too far and he was pissing Nami off. "Usopp," Nami said quietly. She had taken a seat on the bench that circled the primary mast of the ship. Usopp stopped his rant at Luffy and turned to look at Nami. "Stop, all right? Just stop," she said calmly. Normally, Usopp wouldn't have pushed this any further, but he still had energy to burn. He pointed his finger at Nami. "Oh no, do not sit there and defend him," he said angrily. His tone had calmed down and he wasn't shouting anymore, but he still was not happy. "You were more broken up by what he did than anyone. The least he can do is offer an explanation." He turned to the rest of the crew who were scattered around the grass lawn. "Come on, someone has to agree with me," he pleaded. Sanji and Zoro both nodded, but Brook spoke up first. "Well, yes. I would certainly like to know what happened to our captain, but is all this shouting really necessary?" he said, putting his hand to his head. "We have had a hard day and I for one have a skull-splitting headache." He paused for a moment before laughing. "I made a bone-appropriate joke for once and I wasn't even making a joke," he laughed. Brook began spinning in place and singing. Robin sighed and ignored the noisy skeleton. "I agree, mostly," she said. "Luffy does owe us an explanation at least. I don't understand what you were trying to accomplish by turning yourself into the Marines," she said with concern in her voice. Brook bounced in front of Robin and continued spinning in place, but Sanji gently pushed the spinning skeleton out of the way with the heel of his foot. "Yeah, what gives, Luffy?" Sanji asked, holding Brook back. "Was turning yourself in really the only thing your pint-sized brain could come up with? I know you don't like to sit around, but there had to be something better you could have done. Like attending to our gorgeous navigator." Hearts appeared in his eyes as he dashed over to Nami on the bench and laid his hands on her legs. "If you're not man enough to love your lady like she deserves to be, I'd be happy to." Sanji's words were cut off by a swift punch to the face from Nami. She was in no mood for Sanji's perversion right now. Luffy looked at everyone and laughed. "Why does everyone keep saying I turned myself in?" he asked innocently. His question was rewarded with a look of surprise from everyone except Nami, who was covering her face with one hand. Underneath that hand was a slowly growing smile. She knew that Luffy never intended to get captured by the Marines, but she didn't know exactly what he was trying to do. Chopper tilted his head and looked at Luffy. "But you turned yourself in, right?" the reindeer asked. "I mean, that was why you went to the Navy base, right? You were turning yourself in because I couldn't fix you, right?" Chopper asked. Luffy laughed and shook his head. "That's what Nami asked," he said as he put his hand on the back of his head. He giggled again before answering. "I love you guys. Every one of you are funny. I wasn't turning myself in. That's stupid. If I did that, my bounty would go back down to 0, right? I don't want that," he said nonchalantly. Brook stopped spinning and came over to listen while Frankie scratched his head. "All right, now I'm super confused," he said. "If you weren't turning yourself in, then what the heck were you doing?" Luffy shrugged. "I was looking for the poison Chopper needed." Everyone's shocked looks remained and even Nami looked over the top of her hand. She looked at Luffy and her smile grew a bit more, but she didn't want to show it. "Yeah, he said that the Marines had the stuff they used to poison me. So I figured that I would go and get some for you, Chopper," Luffy said with a big grin. "I couldn't find any though." The crew stood around in stunned silence until Robin decided to get more information. "So, you broke into a Navy base to find an experimental poison that they probably keep under heavy guard at Navy headquarters?" she asked slowly. Zoro laughed and shook his head. "Luffy, you weren't going to find that stuff here. A poison that powerful wouldn't be at some backwater Navy base," Zoro said. Luffy looked at Zoro with a confused look. "But Chopper said that the Marines had it. So I went to get some," he explained proudly. He walked over to the bench where Nami was sitting and sat down next to her. "I would have gotten it too if those Marines hadn't tried to hurt Nami. Lucky for me, we didn't need to find it. I turned back into rubber by myself," he said, giggling. The crew stood around in a stunned silence except for Robin and Zoro, who were laughing at their captain's antics. Nami groaned. "You moron. You had no idea what you were looking for," she said sweetly. She shook her head and felt Luffy's hat bounce on her back. Nami smiled and decided that she was going to hang onto it for now. "Besides, you were raiding the fridge when I found you. You definitely weren't going to find a super secret poison in there," she said, looking at him. As hard as she tried, she couldn't make the smile on her face go away. She was so happy to have Luffy back on the ship. Feeling him sitting next to her was a feeling that she would never get tired of. Luffy shrugged and laughed. To the great displeasure of Luffy, Nami stood up and stretched. "Now I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I'm beat. I say we get some sleep and discuss our captain's idiocy in the morning." Everyone agreed. Sanji, who was still sitting on the ground from Nami's punch, stood up. "Sounds like a plan," he said, brushing himself off. "I'll take first watch. Mosshead, you take second watch around." Luffy stood up and spoke, cutting Sanji off. "Nah, don't," Wo said with a big smile. "I'll take watch. All night. You guys get a good night's sleep. Captain's orders." The crew objected at first. By all rights, Luffy should be more tired than any of them. But idiot or not, he was still the captain. Everyone reluctantly agreed and headed for bed. As he watched his crew heading to their respective dorms, he giggled and turned his attention to the bright moon above him. "It's the least I can do for making everyone so mad," Luffy thought, looking at sky. "So, you don't seem very angry at our captain, Miss Navigator," Robin said as she sat at the vanity in the girls' dorm. She was gently brushing her hair while looking at Nami in the mirror. "I figured that you would be ready to kill him yourself after the way he ran off," she said with a smile. Nami shook her head. "No," Nami said as she lay on her bed facing Robin. "I mean I was." She laughed. "I was furious with him when I found him in the kitchen, but having him back on the ship making a fool of himself." Nami paused and giggled as she ran her hand through her hair. "I just can't bring myself to be angry at him now." Her eyes drifted from Robin to the object that lay on her bed next to her. It was Luffy's straw hat. She placed her hand on top of it and gently stroked the top of the hat. She noticed that it was torn in a few places. "I'll have to fix this up for him tomorrow," she thought. Robin looked at the hat in the mirror and smiled. "A girl and her lover's hat, huh?" she said with a sly grin. "You know, having that hat gives you the perfect reason to go back out and spend time with him," Robin said as she turned away from the mirror and turned in her chair to face Nami. Nami smiled and Robin smiled back. "But judging from that grin, you were planning on doing that anyway, weren't you?" Robin asked. Nami sat up and nodded her head. "Yeah, I was. I am just giving him a little bit of time to himself first. I was planning on sneaking out after you fell asleep, you know," she asked, sticking her tongue out at Robin. Robin smiled and stood up. "Please, Miss Navigator," Robin said as she walked over to her bed and sat down. "I always know when you leave and when you come back. You aren't as sneaky as you think you are," Robin teased. Nami scoffed and stood up. "Well, next time I'll save you the trouble and tell you when I'm sneaking out," Nami said as she picked up Luffy's hat and walked towards the door. She stopped as she reached the door. Nami looked over her shoulder and smiled. "As long as you tell me when you sneak off," Nami said, giggling. She opened the door and stepped out. "Good night, Robin," she said as she closed the door. Robin chuckled and lay down. "Should I expect you back tonight?" Robin called as the door closed. She received no response. The older woman shook her head as she turned the lights off and went to bed. Nami walked out onto the balcony outside of the girls' dorm and leaned against the railing. It had been about an hour since the crew had turned in for the night and she figured that everyone, except Robin, was already asleep. That's what she was hoping anyway. Nami wanted to spend some time with Luffy and she didn't want any interruptions. She scanned the ship looking for him. But there was no sign of Luffy anywhere. "Where is he?" Nami said aloud. "He offered to stay on watch." "There's no way he went to bed." Nami walked over to the steps and descended them. She walked into the middle of the grass and looked around. "Luffy?" she called out. Getting no response, Nami became irritated. "Where the heck is he?" she said with attitude evident in her tone. She began to turn around when she stopped and chuckled to herself. "Duh. I know where he is. Am I really that stupid?" Nami turned and began heading for the lion figurehead. It was his favorite spot on the entire ship. If he was anywhere, it would be there. As she drew closer to the lion, she loudly cleared her throat. In quick response, she heard a scrambling sound and Luffy's head appeared at the top of the figurehead. Luffy smiled as soon as he laid his eyes on Nami. "Hey Nami," he said cheerfully. He held his hand out to her. "Want to come up?" he asked sweetly. Nami nodded and took his hand. He helped her up onto the figurehead and jumped down to help her down onto the nose. The pair sat down a few inches away from each other. "What's up? Couldn't sleep?" Luffy asked. Nami had to giggle at the concern in his voice. "Oh, you were concerned about me?" Nami asked with a smile on her face. "After the stunt you pulled on us, you're concerned? Don't make me laugh," she said a bit harsher than she meant to. Luffy shrugged and turned his head to look out of the dark sea. "Come on Nami, don't tell me you're still mad at me. I didn't want you to worry about me," he said quietly. Nami scoffed. "After the scene you caused when you left the Sunny? Luffy, you threw away your hat for crying out loud. You ran away and I honestly thought you were going to try to hurt yourself. How did you think I was going to react?" Nami demanded. The question was a bit out of Luffy's expertise and she didn't expect him to answer, but he did. Luffy tilted his head down so the shadows of his hair covered his eyes. "I don't really want to talk about it," he said hesitantly. Nami crossed her arms and glared at Luffy. "No, you don't get to keep this bottled up," she said menacingly. If looks could kill, her gaze would have killed Luffy 10 times over. "We talked about this. You don't get to hide your feelings from me. That's not fair to me, and not healthy for you." She smiled and her tone softened. "This whole ordeal was hard on you, wasn't it?" Nami said softly. "You can talk to me about She paused briefly and sighed. "Now spill," she ordered. Luffy groaned and hung his head. "Fine. But can I have my hat back yet?" he pleaded. Nami shook her head. "No," she said plainly. Luffy groaned again. He took a deep breath and looked at the dark water ahead of them. "Nami, I didn't mean to scare you. I was scared. I knew that I had to do something to fix myself. I have to protect you, Nami. I have to. Luffy's words trailed away. Nami looked at him and waited for him to continue. When he didn't, Nami moved closer to him and laid her head on his shoulder. He looked down at her and she looked up at him. Nami smiled and nodded. Luffy returned the nod. I don't want to lose you again. 2 years ago, I couldn't stop us from being torn apart." He looked down at his hand. "When I heard Chopper saying that he couldn't fix me, I saw it happening again. I saw you getting hurt or worse and I wasn't strong enough to stop it. I couldn't take it. That's why I ran away. I was so scared about losing you again. I had to help Chopper. His words trailed off again. Luffy wasn't the kind of person to openly speak like this very often. His words really surprised Nami. She loved hearing him talk like this because it showed her how much he honestly cared about her. Luffy never talked like this. Nami knew that these words were the words his heart wanted to tell her. Besides, Luffy wasn't smart enough to lie about this kind of thing. "Luffy," Nami mumbled as she closed her eyes. She felt Luffy's hand crawl up to hers and his fingers slip between hers. He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Nami. Please don't be mad at me," he pleaded. Nami felt like her heart was going to explode, but she knew she couldn't give in this easily. "No way," Nami snapped without letting go of Luffy's hand. "You owe me big time, mister," she said, smacking his hand. "You owe me at least 4 million belly for this whole thing. And I expect full payment very soon," she said forcefully. Luffy stayed silent for a moment and then giggled. "Aw come on Nami. 400 million? That's a lot. Do I really have to pay all of it?" he asked. Nami picked her head up and turned it away from Luffy. "Yes. And there's nothing you can say that will get you out of your debt," she said. Luffy giggled. "Nothing, huh?" he said suspiciously. "What about this?" he asked, before Nami could ask what he meant on the side of her face. He gently turned Nami's face around to his. Luffy leaned forward and kissed Nami, locking their lips together in a deep, passionate kiss. Nami did nothing for a few seconds, but she couldn't ignore him. She closed her eyes and put her arms on Luffy's shoulders, holding him against her. Nami loved the feeling of his lips against hers, and she never wanted this moment to end. Time seemed to come to a stop, and there was nothing else in the entire world except the two of them. These two lovers locked in a never-ending kiss. When Luffy finally broke off the kiss and tried to pull his head away, he was stopped by Nami's arms. Nami shook her head. "Nope. You don't get to leave yet," she said slyly. Nami pulled Luffy back in for another kiss. He offered no resistance and quickly gave in to another kiss. This one didn't last as long as the first, but Nami loved every second of it, and she knew that Luffy loved it too. Finally, Nami let her hands slip away from Luffy's shoulders and she felt him slowly pull away. He didn't go very far though. Luffy kept his face right next to hers and he smiled at her. "I love doing that," he said plainly. Luffy rested his forehead against hers. Nami giggled. She knew she was right, but it was still nice to hear him say it. "So does that count?" he asked. "Count for what?" Nami asked, confused. "My debt," Luffy said, laying a quick kiss on Nami's nose. Nami fought away a smile as she pretended to be offended. "The only reason you kissed me was to work off your debt?" she asked, pretending to be hurt. She emphasized the point by pulling her head away from Luffy, leaving his forehead stranded. Luffy squirmed. "I can't believe you," she snapped. No, that's no it at all," he said desperately. "I love kissing you, debt or no debt," he said, tripping over his own words. Nami giggled. "Oh?" she asked. It pained her to do it, but she decided to let him off. He did have a pretty bad day. "Alright, fine. But that little screw-up just sent your debt through the roof," she said with a large smile. Luffy groaned. "Mmmii," he complained. "That's not fair. Now how much is it?" he asked. Nami shrugged, returning her forehead to its rightful place against Luffy's. I don't know yet. So you better start working on it," she said, leaning in for another kiss. Luffy quickly accepted the kiss and his lips met hers for a third time. This kiss was brief but worth it. As they pulled away from each other, Nami felt Luffy's hand squeezing hers again. Nami sighed happily. She leaned her head forward, leaned up against Luffy. "Besides, a debt this large is going to take a lot more than a few little kisses to pay off," she said, looking up at him. Luffy giggled. "Yeah, I know," he said. He paused for a few moments, just enjoying being with the woman he loved. The pair listened to the sounds of the tranquil night sea. This moment was perfect and they both knew it. "Hey Nami?" Luffy asked quietly. "Yeah," she answered. "Thanks for saving me," he said with a smile on his face. "I love you so much." Nami smiled as she felt tears stinging the edges of her eyes. "I love you too, Luffy," she said, snuggling against him and feeling the warmth of his body against hers. This was another feeling she loved. The pair sat in silence for a few minutes before Luffy broke the silence. "Hey Nami?" Luffy asked again. "Yeah?" she answered again. "Can I have my hat back yet?" he pleaded. Nami laughed and pulled her body away from his. She began taking the hat off of her neck. "No," she joked as she set the hat down on his lap. She snuggled against him again. Luffy and Nami sat in each other's embrace until the sun began to rise, ushering in a new day. A new day of adventure and hardships awaited them. But they both knew as long as they had one another and their friends, they would be able to overcome anything the new world could throw at them. There was only one thing left to say. "Just so you know," Nami said, sticking her tongue out at Luffy, "I love you more."